She stepped off that train carrying everything she owned in one battered suitcase, and the man who was supposed to love her looked at it and laughed. Right there on the platform in front of God and every soul in Red Hollow, Richard Caldwell chose his pride over her heart. And Eleanor Hayes stood alone in the summer dust with nowhere to go and nobody coming. But somebody was watching. And what happened next changed everything. If this story already has your heart beating faster, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every single part of this matters. The summer of 1887 arrived in Red Hollow, Wyoming, like it always did, hot, dry, and indifferent to the troubles of ordinary people. The afternoon train from Cheyenne came in 12 minutes late, which was the most exciting thing that happened in Red Hollow on most days. People gathered at the station the way they always did, not because they were expecting anyone important, but because in a town this small, the train arriving was entertainment enough. Women stood fanning themselves near the wooden posts. Old men sat on barrels with nothing better to do than watch. Children chased each other along the platform's edge until their mothers pulled them back by the collar. It was an ordinary Tuesday in June, right up until it wasn't. Eleanor Hayes appeared in the doorway of the passenger car, the way a woman appears when she has spent 3 days on a train, working up the courage to believe something good is finally waiting for her on the other side. She had dressed carefully that morning. Her cotton dress, a soft faded blue that had been washed so many times it had gone gentle, was pressed as neatly as a woman could manage without a proper iron. Her brown hair was pinned up beneath a straw hat with a pale ribbon. She carried one suitcase. It was not a large suitcase. It was the suitcase of a woman who had packed everything she owned and still had room left over. She stepped down onto the platform and looked around with the careful, hopeful eyes of someone trying very hard not to look desperate. She saw the crowd before she saw him. And then she saw him. Richard Caldwell was not a difficult man to spot. He was thick through the shoulders, well-dressed for a frontier town, with the kind of carefully groomed mustache that announced a man thought highly of himself. He stood near the station house with his thumbs hooked in his vest pockets, and when Eleanor's eyes found his face, she smiled. He did not smile back. He looked at her. Then he looked at the suitcase in her hand. Then he looked back at her face with an expression. Eleanor would spend years trying to forget the slow, deliberate look of a man doing arithmetic and arriving at a disappointing sum. "That's it," he said. He did not lower his voice. He did not step forward to greet her. He just stood there with his thumbs in his pockets and his voice carrying clean across the platform. "That's all you brought?" Eleanor stopped walking. "Richard, one bag." He said it like it was an accusation, like she had personally failed him by not arriving with a trousseau, a dowry, and a railroad car full of furniture. "I was told your family had holdings, property. I was told there were assets." The fans stopped moving. The children went still. Every pair of eyes on that platform turned toward Eleanor Hayes and her one battered suitcase. She kept her chin up. That said something about her even then. "My family's situation changed. I wrote to you about. You wrote me a very careful letter, Miss Hayes." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and held it up briefly, like evidence in a trial. "A letter that told me a great deal without telling me what mattered. I asked a man in Cheyenne to look into your circumstances." His voice dropped just enough to suggest he was being gracious by not shouting. "There is no property. There is no savings. Your father left debts, not assets. You arrived here with one bag and a story. I arrived here because you asked me to come." Her voice was even. She was working very hard to keep it even. "We corresponded for 4 months. You made a commitment. I made an offer based on information I was given." He folded the letter and tucked it back in his pocket with the practiced calm of a man closing a ledger. "The information was incorrect. I'm a businessman, Miss Hayes. I require a partner who brings something to this arrangement. What exactly are you bringing me?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Eleanor had ever heard. She stood there on that platform, with the summer sun pressing down on her shoulders and the eyes of an entire town on her face, and she understood fully, completely, with the sick clarity of a woman who has just walked into a trap, that there was no version of this moment that ended well for her. She had sold the last of her mother's jewelry to buy the train ticket. She had no money to buy a ticket back. She had no one waiting for her in Cheyenne. No family, no friends with spare rooms. She had answered Richard Caldwell's advertisement in the Cheyenne Gazette because it had seemed like an answer to a prayer. A man with property and stability, seeking a respectable wife. And Eleanor Hayes was nothing if not respectable. She had believed in it. Standing on that platform with that suitcase in her hand and that crowd watching, she understood exactly how badly believing in things could hurt. Richard. She said his name quietly. A plea she hated herself for making. Please. We can discuss this privately. I think we've said what needs saying. He adjusted his hat. I'm sorry for your journey. I'd recommend you speak to the station manager about the next train back. He turned and walked away. He did not look back. The crowd parted for him, the way crowds part for men with money and certainty. And Eleanor stood alone on the platform, with her suitcase and her hat, and her carefully pressed dress, and she did not cry. She would not give them that. She locked her jaw, and she breathed, and she stared at a fixed point on the horizon, and she absolutely did not cry. Miss? The station manager was a heavy-set man with the apologetic bearing of someone who had been forced to deliver bad news often enough that it had settled permanently into the set of his shoulders. He appeared at her elbow like a bad omen. Miss, I'm going to need to ask about your intentions. Next train back to Cheyenne doesn't come through until Thursday morning. I can't have... He cleared his throat. Town policy. We don't allow unaccompanied women to loiter on station grounds without a clear destination. I have a destination, Eleanor said. Ma'am, with respect, where? She had no answer for that. She had been so certain there would be one. She had been so certain that Richard Caldwell's farmhouse, whatever it looked like, whatever hardships it held, would be her answer. She had built the entire future of her life on the assumption that a man who wrote warm letters in careful handwriting meant them. She was 27 years old, and she was standing on a train platform in a town that did not want her with one suitcase and no money and no plan. And the afternoon sun was merciless, and the dust was thick, and the eyes of Red Hollow were still on her, still watching the way people watch a wagon crash. Fascinated, grateful, it isn't them. She can come with me. The voice came from the left. It was not a loud voice. It was not a dramatic voice. It was the voice of a man who did not use more words than necessary and expected them to land with weight when he did. Low and steady, and carrying across the platform without effort, the way a man's voice carries when he is accustomed to open spaces and is not accustomed to making announcements. Eleanor turned. How was tall? That was the first thing. The kind of tall that a person noticed before they noticed anything else. The unhurried, unself-conscious tall of a man who had been that height long enough that he had forgotten it was remarkable. He wore a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a worn brown leather vest, and a Stetson the color of old saddle leather. His jaw carried a few days of dark stubble. His eyes, when they found Eleanor's face, were the calm, direct blue of a winter sky. I was not looking at the crowd. He was not performing for anyone. He was looking at Eleanor Hayes, the way a man looks at a problem he has decided to solve, and he was walking toward her with the unhurried stride of a man who has made a decision and sees no reason to rush it. I need someone to help with my home, he said. He stopped a few feet from her and touched the brim of his hat. I've got a ranch outside of town. House needs work. Cooking needs doing. I can offer room and board and a fair wage. He paused. It's honest work, miss. That's all I'm offering. Eleanor stared at him. Around them, the crowd was very quiet. I don't know you, she said. No, ma'am. Name's William Carter. I've got a place 3 miles east on the Hollow Road. Ask anyone in town, they'll tell you I keep my word. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Not suspicious exactly. More honest than she meant to be. Why would you offer? Because you need a place to land, he said simply. And I need help with the ranch. He looked at her steadily. No strings attached. I'm not Richard Caldwell. The way he said the name, flat, factual without contempt but without warmth, made it clear that he had watched what happened on this platform and had formed his opinion. The station manager cleared his throat. "Well, that seems—" "We didn't ask you," William said without looking at him. The station manager closed his mouth. Eleanor looked at this man, this stranger with quiet eyes and a worn leather vest, and a directness she had not expected from anyone today. And she made the calculation that only a woman with no good options can make. She measured him against what she knew, which was nothing, and she measured him against what she had just experienced, which was Richard Caldwell, and a crowd full of people who watched a woman be humiliated and did nothing. This man had stepped forward. That was not nothing. "All right," she said. She picked up her suitcase. "I accept." Something in his expression shifted, not quite relief, not quite satisfaction. Something quieter than either of those things. He reached out and took the suitcase from her hand before she could protest. "My wagon's out front," he said. He walked, and she followed, and behind them the whispers started immediately, the inevitable grinding machinery of a small town processing something unexpected. William Carter did not speak much on the drive out of town. He sat on the wagon bench with the reins loose in his hands and his eyes on the road, and Eleanor sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap and her hat still pressed neatly onto her head, and neither of them said anything for a long time. The horse, a steady bay mare, with the resigned look of an animal that has made this trip too many times to find it interesting, moved at a reliable pace along the rutted dirt road. The silence was not uncomfortable. That surprised Eleanor. After the noise and the eyes and the voices of the past hour, the silence felt almost like kindness. She studied him from the corner of her eye. He had the hands of a man who worked outdoors, brown and capable with calluses built up over years rather than weeks. There was a small scar along his left jaw that had the faded look of something old. He held the reins with the easy familiarity of a man who had been driving wagons his whole life and did not have to think about it. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. She kept her voice neutral, not grateful, not resentful, just honest. I was quiet for a moment. "No. People will talk. People in Red Hollow talk about everything." He didn't sound troubled by it. "Let them. They'll assume the worst. What other people assume about my ranch is their business." He glanced at her briefly. "What I do on my ranch is mine." She considered that. It was a strange answer, and also, she thought, a principled one. "What happened to your last housekeeper?" she asked. "Or whoever was doing the cooking before?" The smallest change crossed his face, not discomfort exactly, but something adjacent to it. "Nobody. I've been managing alone." "For how long?" "A beat. 6 years." 6 years. She looked at him with something new in her expression, not pity, which she suspected he would not tolerate, but a kind of recognition, the kind that comes from one lonely person encountering another. "That's a long time," she said. "It is," he agreed. And then he said nothing else. The ranch appeared at the end of a long straight drive, flanked by summer grass gone golden at the tips. There was a main house, 2 outbuildings, a barn, a water pump that she could see from here. The house was larger than she expected, solid-built square, the kind of structure that promised durability over beauty. The front porch sagged slightly on one side. The windows needed cleaning. The garden patch near the east wall was a tangle of weeds so thorough that whatever had been planted there had long since surrendered. William helped her down from the wagon with the impersonal efficiency of a man who understood courtesy as a practical obligation rather than a social performance. He carried her suitcase to the front door without being asked. Inside the house told her everything she needed to know about 6 years of a man living alone. It was not dirty exactly. It was clean in the way that places are clean when someone manages the minimum necessary maintenance and nothing more. Everything was in its functional place. Nothing was where it was because someone had wanted it there, the small invisible arrangements of a person making a home out of a structure. There were no curtains. The table held a tin coffee cup and a stack of papers, but nothing else. The walls were bare. The fireplace had a neat stack of wood beside it, and ash from the last fire that had been swept but not fully cleared. It was a house where someone slept and ate and waited out the dark. It was not a home. Eleanor set her hat on the table, the first object placed in that room, purely because a person wanted it somewhere, and turned around slowly taking inventory. "The kitchen," she said. "Does it have what I need to cook? Enough. Do you have a preference for meals?" He paused like the question had come from an unexpected direction. "Whatever's practical. Mr. Carter." She turned to face him. "I'm going to need you to be a little more specific than that. I can cook a great many things, but I need to know what's in your pantry and what your preferences are and what you'll actually eat, because there's nothing more wasteful than cooking for someone and having them leave it on the plate." He blinked. It was a small movement, but she caught it, the slight adjustment of a man recalibrating. "I eat everything," he said. "I don't leave food on my plate." "Good." She looked at him directly. "And I need to know the rules of this house. What you expect. What you don't want touched. Where I should and shouldn't go. Because I'm a practical woman. Mr. Carter, and I've just arrived in a strange situation, and I'd rather understand the terms clearly than spend the next week stepping on things I shouldn't." I was quiet for a moment, studying her. There was something in his expression that might have been respect, the watchful, careful kind that takes time to arrive. "My study," he said. "Papers and ledgers on the left side of the desk. Don't rearrange them. Barn's open to you if you need it. Horses don't bite. You'll have the back bedroom door locks from the inside." He paused. "That matters to you. I understand that. The lock works." Something in Eleanor's chest unwound slightly. She had not realized she was holding herself braced for something worse until the bracing eased. "Thank you," she said. "Room and board plus $2 a week," he said. "Same as I'd pay any hand." "I accept." He nodded once, picked up his hat from the hook by the door. He had hung it there automatically, without looking, the reflex of a man who did things the same way every day, and moved toward the door. "I'll be in the barn until supper," he said. "Help yourself to what's in the pantry. It's not much." "Mr. Carter." He paused at the door. "I want you to know," she said, and she chose each word carefully, because she was a woman who had been underestimated today, and she needed to be understood clearly from the beginning, "that I am not a charity case. I intend to earn every cent of that wage. I'm going to cook your meals and clean your house and manage whatever else needs managing, and I'm going to do it well. That is not me being grateful for today. That is me telling you who I am." He turned and looked at her for a long, still moment. "I believe you," he said, and then he walked out the door. Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen for a moment, breathing. Then she rolled up her sleeves. The pantry held flour-dried beans, 2 tins of coffee, a slab of bacon wrapped in cloth cornmeal, dried apples, and a jar of honey that had crystallized from sitting too long. It was not much, but it was something. She had cooked meals from far less in years not long past, when her father's illness had eaten through their savings like a slow fire through dry wood. She found a pot and filled it at the kitchen pump. She started a fire in the stove with the calm competence of a woman who has started 1,000 fires in 1,000 stoves and finds no drama in it. She sorted through what she had and made decisions, efficient, practical decisions. And by the time the light through the kitchen window had gone, the particular gold that says early evening, the smell of something warm and savory had filled the house. She set the table, not just the tin cup and the stack of papers. An actual table setting, 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware from the drawer where she'd found them, a small crockery bowl with salt. She folded a rough square of cloth into something approximating a napkin. She brought the pot from the stove and set it on the trivet she'd found on the back shelf, and then she stood back and looked at it. It looked like a meal someone had prepared for someone. That was more than this table had seen in a very long time. William came in from the barn at the exact moment she expected him. She had already noticed that he moved on a schedule, arriving and departing at intervals that suggested a man whose days ran by habit rather than impulse. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the table. He looked at the stove. He looked at Eleanor, who was wiping her hands on a cloth and watching him with the patient, neutral expression of a woman who is waiting for a response and has already decided she doesn't need it to be a good one. He said nothing for a moment. Then he crossed to the basin, washed his hands, and sat down at the table. He tasted the stew. He ate most of the pot. He said, "That's good," in the same tone he'd said everything else, quiet, factual, unadorned. And Eleanor understood that from William Carter. That was equivalent to another man's extended speech of praise. "Thank you," she said. "You made enough for tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," he nodded, and that was the end of the conversation about supper. But Eleanor noticed with the trained attention of a woman who had learned to read rooms and people and silences, the way other people read books, that he sat at the table for a few minutes after he finished eating. Not working, not reading, just sitting, like a man remembering what it felt like to finish a meal at a table with another person in the house. The next morning she woke before him. She heard him moving in the kitchen, the clunk of a tin cup, the creak of the stove door, and she lay in the back bedroom and listened to the sounds of someone else in the house, and for the first time in longer than she could immediately remember, the sounds were something other than threatening. She dressed and came out. Howe was standing at the stove with the coffee pot, and he looked at her arrival the way he seemed to look at most things, steady, unsurprised, taking in information without reacting immediately to it. "I'll make breakfast," she said. You were going to drink coffee and go to the barn." She moved past him to the stove with the confidence of a woman who has decided she is in charge of this kitchen and is informing him of that fact rather than requesting his agreement. "Sit down." A beat of silence. "Yes, ma'am," he said, not sarcastically. There was something in it that might, on a man less contained, have been the beginning of amusement. She made biscuits from the flour and lard she'd found the night before, fried the remaining bacon, made a pan of scrambled eggs from the 6 eggs she'd discovered in a crate near the back door. When she set the plate in front of him, he looked at it with the expression of a man confronting something he had forgotten existed. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "You're paying me $2 a week," she said. "Breakfast is included. My last cook, when I had one, made oatmeal." "Did you like oatmeal?" He picked up his fork. "No." "Then it's good I'm not making oatmeal." The silence that followed was different from the silences of the day before. It was smaller, more comfortable. The way silences get between two people who are beginning cautiously to understand each other's particular rhythms. 3 days passed, then a week. Eleanor established herself in the house, the way water establishes itself in a vessel, quietly, completely filling every space that needed filling without making a production of it. She cleaned, she cooked, she repaired what she could, and identified what needed proper repair, and left a careful list on the kitchen table, with nails and items noted in neat handwriting. Because she had observed that William Carter responded better to written lists than to verbal ones, and she had no patience for people who ignore the evidence in front of them. He found the list. He studied it for a moment. Then he fixed the second kitchen shelf that same afternoon. She planted seeds in the garden patch near the east wall, working through the tangle of weeds with a patience that took William 2 days to notice and then observe, with something he could not immediately name. He came home from the south fence one afternoon to find her on her knees in the dirt, methodical and unhurried, clearing a row of ground that would take weeks to show any result. "You'll be gone before those come up," he said. He hadn't meant it as anything. It was an observation. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him with those direct, calm eyes. "Maybe," she said, "but the garden should still get planted." He didn't have an answer for that. He went into the barn and found himself thinking about it for an hour. The trouble with Red Hollow started on a Wednesday. Eleanor had gone into town to buy flour and a few supplies. She went alone. She had been going alone since the first week, because she was not a woman who waited for a chaperone, and William had offered once, and she had said no thank you, in a way that made him understand it was a definitive no. And she managed the shopping at the general store with the brisk efficiency of a woman accustomed to making limited funds stretch. It was on the way back that she encountered Martha Hale. Martha Hale was the wife of the town's most prosperous rancher, and the person Red Hollow had appointed through general consensus as its social conscience. She was a woman of opinions, firmly held and freely shared, and she positioned herself on the boardwalk in front of the dry goods store with the intentionality of a person who had been waiting. "Miss Hayes." Eleanor stopped. Mrs. Hale, I hope you're settling in well. The words were polite. The tone underneath them was not. At Mr. Carter's place. I am, thank you. I hope you understand. Martha Hale adjusted her gloves with the precision of a woman buying time. That this town has certain expectations regarding propriety, regarding the reputations of its residents. I'm sure it does, Eleanor said, an unattached woman living on a single man's property. She left the implication hanging in the summer air like smoke. Eleanor looked at her for a moment. She had the specific focused calm of a woman who has been humiliated recently enough that she is no longer afraid of smaller humiliations. Mrs. Hale, she said, I am Mr. Carter's housekeeper. I have a room with a lock on the door. I cook his meals and clean his house and manage his household for a wage the same as any cook or housekeeper manages anywhere. If Red Hollow has concerns about that arrangement, Red Hollow is welcome to hire me away with a better offer. She picked up her basket. Good day. She walked away without looking back. Martha Hale stared after her. William heard about it, of course. Red Hollow was not a large town, and what happened in it traveled fast. The version he heard was from Tom Barrett, who ran the livery stable and had been standing near enough to the dry goods store to catch the exchange. That woman of yours, Tom said without preamble, when William came in to check on the horse's shoe the following morning. She's my housekeeper, William said. Yeah, well, your housekeeper told Martha Hale to take her opinion and... Tom paused, editing. She was real polite about it, but she said it. William was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. Tom looked at him. She's right, William said. He checked the shoe, found it sound, straightened up. Martha Hale's been running this town's business since before either of us got here. She'll survive someone saying no to her. He paid for the shoeing and walked back to his wagon, and somewhere in the middle of the walk, he realized he was smiling. It was a small smile, the kind a man makes when no one is watching. He stopped walking for a moment, aware of it, surprised by it. Then he kept going. She found the photograph on a Saturday evening. She had been cleaning the study, the papers on the left side of the desk untouched as promised, but the accumulated dust of years addressed with the thoroughness it deserved, and in the back of the bottom desk drawer beneath a folded survey map and a patent document. She didn't examine. She found a small tintype photograph in a plain wooden frame. A woman. Dark-haired, very young, with the particular stillness of a person who has been told to hold very still and is doing their earnest best. Pretty in a soft, unassuming way. And beside her in the photograph, a younger version of William Carter. Probably 15 years younger, but unmistakably him. The same jaw. The same direct gaze even in a photograph. And the woman's hand rested on his arm. Eleanor looked at it for a moment. Then she set it on the corner of the desk where he would see it if he came in, and she went back to cleaning. He came home that evening, and she heard him go into the study. She heard the silence that followed. A long silence. She kept working in the kitchen, making no noise, giving him whatever space a silence like that required. He appeared in the kitchen doorway eventually. She looked up from the stove. You found it, he said. I was cleaning. I put it on the desk so I wouldn't lose it. She met his eyes. I didn't look at the papers. I know you didn't. He stood in the doorway for a moment with that particular stillness. He had the stillness of a man accustomed to carrying things alone. Her name was Catherine. She died 11 years ago. Winter fever. It was fast. He paused. I wasn't here when it happened. I was away. I came back and she was already... He stopped. Eleanor held very still. I'm sorry, she said. Just that. Not embellished. Not rushed past. He nodded. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at the stove. Smells like you made something with those dried apples, he said. Apple cake, she said. First one from the new oven calibration. I wasn't sure about the temperature. It smells fine. Sit down, I'll cut you a piece. He sat down at the table. She cut him a piece of apple cake and poured coffee and sat across from him, and they ate in the particular quality of silence that two people share when one of them has said something true and the other has heard it. Richard Caldwell came to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon near the end of July. William was mending fence on the south boundary, and Eleanor was in the garden. The garden that was by now visibly progressing with small green shoots of onion and carrot and bean vine. Climbing the rough string trellis she'd built from leftover lumber, when she heard the sound of a horse approaching on the drive, she stood up. She did not need to see his face to know who it was. Something in the way he sat in the saddle, that particular posture of a man who owns everything and expects the world to confirm it, identified him before she was close enough to read his expression. She did not move toward him. She stood in the garden and let him come to her. He pulled up and looked down at her from the saddle, with an expression she recognized, the look of a man recalculating. She was not. She suspected what he expected to find. She was in a cotton work apron with garden dirt on her hands, and her hair pinned up practically beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and she looked, she thought with quiet satisfaction, like someone who had found exactly where she was supposed to be. Eleanor. He took off his hat, a gesture of courtesy that cost him nothing and meant nothing. Mr. Caldwell. She did not offer her hand. You're looking well. He glanced at the garden. This is... He seemed to search for the word. Unexpected. Is it? I came to apologize. The words arrived in the order of a prepared speech, not a genuine impulse. The situation at the station was handled poorly. I reacted badly to disappointing news, and I said things that were unkind. Eleanor looked at him. She took her time about it. Yes, she said. You did. I wonder if we might... He shifted in the saddle, and for the first time, she heard something under the smooth social surface that he usually maintained. Something uncomfortable. I wonder if we might talk about whether there's still a path forward for what I'd proposed. The silence that landed after that statement was the kind that has weight to it. No, Eleanor said. He blinked. Eleanor, Miss Hayes. She kept her voice level and direct. And no, Mr. Caldwell. There is not a path forward. What you proposed was a business arrangement, and I am no longer interested in the terms. I have work here. I am content. You're a housekeeper, he said, and the contempt in it was involuntary. She could see him trying to suppress it and failing. On Carter's ranch. Is that really how you want to? I want you to leave, she said. Please. He sat very still. The recalculation in his eyes had changed into something harder and colder, something she filed away for later consideration. Carter, he said, not to her, but in a tone that indicated he was thinking about something else entirely. Carter's got good land out here. South boundary runs near the river. The south boundary, said a voice behind Eleanor, is posted. She did not startle. She had heard William's horse on the drive and known he was behind her before Caldwell looked up. William came around the corner of the house and stopped beside Eleanor, not in front of her, not between her and Caldwell, but beside her. It was a small distinction. It was not a small thing. He looked up at Richard Caldwell on his horse, with the flat, unhurried calm of a man who has dealt with larger problems than this one. You're on private land, William said. I'd appreciate you seeing yourself off it. Caldwell looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation, reassessment, the slow work of a man revising a plan. Of course, he said. He put his hat back on. He looked at Eleanor one more time, not an apology in it, not warmth, but something that unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite name. An assessment, like a man pricing something he intends to return for. Miss Hayes, he turned his horse and rode out. William stood beside her until the sound of hoofbeats had faded down the road. You all right? He asked. Yes. She pulled off her garden gloves and looked at them. He's not coming back because he's sorry. No, William agreed. He looked at your land. A pause. I noticed that. She looked up at him. Be careful, Mr. Carter. He looked back at her with those quiet blue eyes, and something passed through them that she could not read, something more complex than she'd expected. You too, he said. And then he walked back toward the barn, and Eleanor stood in her garden with her gloves in her hands and the summer sun on her shoulders, and she looked at the green shoots rising steadily from the dark earth she had turned with her own hands. She had the particular cold feeling that Richard Caldwell's visit was not an ending. It was a beginning. And whatever it was the beginning of, she had a feeling Red Hollow had not seen anything like it yet. The cold feeling Eleanor carried out of the garden on that Thursday afternoon did not leave her overnight. She lay in the back bedroom with the lamp turned low and listened to the ranch settle around her, the creak of old wood cooling in the night air, the distant sound of one of the horses shifting in the barn, the particular silence of a place that sits far enough from town that sound travels differently, and she thought about the way Richard Caldwell had looked at William's land. Not at her, not at the garden, at the land. A man like Richard Caldwell did not ride 3 miles out of town in summer heat to apologize to a woman he'd publicly discarded. That was not who he was. She had read enough of his letters to understand the architecture of his thinking. Everything calculated, everything in service of acquisition. He had come out here to see something, and he had seen it, and he had filed it away behind those smooth, unreadable eyes, and now he was back in Red Hollow making plans. She was certain of it the way a woman gets certain about things when she has spent enough years paying attention to the people who underestimate her. She got up before dawn. William was already at the stove when she came out. She was beginning to understand that he did not sleep much, that the hours between 3 and 5 in the morning were his hours, the ones he spent drinking coffee in the dark kitchen before the day required anything of him. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He did not comment on the hour. She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. "Tell me about the south boundary," she said. Howe was quiet for a moment. The coffee pot sat between them, and he poured her a cup without being asked, which she was beginning to understand was his version of an extended welcome. "What about it?" Caldwell looked at it. When he was here, he looked at the direction of it twice. She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Land near the river is valuable, isn't it?" "Very." "Does he have any claim to it?" Another pause. Longer this time. She watched his face and saw something tighten there. Not evasion, she didn't think, but the particular expression of a man about to say something he hasn't said out loud before. "There's a question," he said finally, "about the original survey." She waited. "When I filed the patent on this property, the county surveyor marked the south line at the riverbank. That's in my deed." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Last spring Caldwell hired a private surveyor. Different man, different numbers. That surveyor claims my south line runs 50 yards north of the river, which would put the riverside strip in unpatented territory. Which Caldwell could then file on. Which he could then file on," William confirmed. Eleanor sat with that for a moment. "And is the county survey correct, or is the private one?" "Mine is correct." His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "I was here when it was done. I walked that line myself. The stakes are still in the ground." "But Caldwell's surveyor has a report." "Filed with the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne 3 months ago." She looked at him across the table in the gray pre-dawn quiet. "You've known about this for 3 months." "Yes, and you haven't done anything about it." He was silent. "William." It was the first time she had used his given name without realizing she was doing it. She didn't correct it. "A man who files a fraudulent survey with the Territorial Land Office and then rides to your property to look at what he's claiming is not a man who plans to stop. Whatever he came here for yesterday, it wasn't apology. You know that." "I know that." "Then why?" "Because I have 30 head of cattle to manage and 3 miles of fence that needs work and a barn roof that won't survive next winter without attention," he said. And the flatness in his voice told her that he had been turning this over in his mind for months and had arrived at the same impossible calculation every time. "I can't fight a land case in Cheyenne and run this ranch at the same time. Lawyers cost money I don't have sitting loose. The territorial office is 60 miles away, and the circuit judge comes through here 4 times a year. Everything about this is built to make it too expensive and too complicated for a working man to fight. That," Eleanor said, "is exactly how men like Richard Caldwell prefer it." He looked at her. "They design the obstacle course," she said, "and then they tell you it's your fault for failing to run it." Something shifted in his expression. Something that had been compressed and tight for a long time. "I've got a copy of the original survey in the study," he said. "The county copy." "Then we start there," she said. "We." She met his eyes. "I told you who I am the first day. I keep my word, Mr. Carter. The same as you." He was quiet for a long moment. The light through the kitchen window was beginning to change, the very first gray softening of the dark. That means dawn is coming, still an hour off, but making its intentions known. "My father was a land agent," Eleanor said. "In Ohio before things went bad. I grew up reading survey documents. I know what to look for." She took a drink of her coffee. "I also know that a fraudulent survey has to have a flaw in it somewhere. No one can fabricate numbers cleanly enough to perfectly match existing geography. There will be an error." He stared at her. "You can read survey documents," he said. "I can read survey documents, maintain a household ledger, cook a decent meal with almost nothing, and apparently grow carrots in Wyoming soil, which my mother always said was impossible." She set down the cup. "Bring me both surveys. Tonight after supper, we'll find the error." He brought the surveys. They sat at the kitchen table until past 10 o'clock that night, which Eleanor understood was approximately 4 hours later than William Carter normally permitted himself to be awake. He sat across from her with the lamp pulled close and watched her go through both documents. The original county survey from 1879, and the copy she'd made him write out from memory of Caldwell's filed report, because they didn't have the original, with the focused attention of a man watching someone do something he hadn't known was possible. She read the way she did most things, quietly, thoroughly, without announcing the process. She made small marks on a separate sheet of paper. She asked him 2 questions about specific landmarks that he answered from 8 years of walking the property. She sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "There," she said. She turned the paper and pointed. "The Creek Fork. Caldwell's surveyor places the southeast corner stake 60 feet from the fork. Your county survey places it 48 feet. 12 feet. 12 feet in 1879 and 12 feet now are the same 12 feet, she said. That stake is in the ground. You said so yourself." "It is." "Then we measure from the stake to the Creek Fork, record the distance with a witness present, and we have documented proof that Caldwell's survey contains a false measurement." She looked up at him. "The Creek Fork hasn't moved. That's the beauty of it. He can argue about everything else, but the Creek Fork is where it is." William looked at this paper. Then he looked at Eleanor. Then he looked at the paper again with the expression of a man who has been carrying a weight for months and has just been shown that it is in fact liftable. "You found that in 2 hours, he said. "I found that in 2 hours because I knew what I was looking for." She gathered the papers neatly. "Who in Red Hollow do you trust?" "Tom Barrett, at the livery." "Anyone else?" he thought. "Doc Whitmore. He's been here since before I came. Honest man." "We need 2 witnesses to the measurement. Men who will stand up and say what they saw in front of a circuit judge if it comes to that." "They'll do it," he said. "I'd stake the ranch on Tom's word." "Don't stake the ranch on anything yet," she said. "But yes, ask them." She started to stand up and William said, "Eleanor." She stopped. He looked at her across the table in the lamplight, and for the first time since she had arrived on his property, she saw something on his face that he had not chosen to put there, something unguarded and genuine that came from somewhere below the habitual stillness. "Thank you," he said, "for this, for seeing it." "You would have gotten there," she said. "Not in time," he said quietly. "Caldwell's been moving on this. He's not waiting around." She looked at him for a moment. "We're not waiting around either," she said. "Get some sleep, William. We start measuring tomorrow." They measured on a Saturday morning. Tom Barrett came out with his boy Jake, who was 16, and had the serious, capable look of a young man who understood that some things mattered. Doc Whitmore arrived on his bay horse with a leather satchel and the measured calm of a man who had delivered babies and set broken bones and sat with dying people and had long since stopped being surprised by anything human beings could do to each other. William walked the south boundary with Eleanor beside him, and Tom and the doc came behind, and they measured from the corner stake to the creek fork 3 times. The first measurement gave them 11 feet 10 inches. The second gave them 11 feet 11 inches. The third gave them 11 feet 10 inches again, not 60 feet, 11 feet 10 inches. Doc Whitmore wrote it down in his precise physician's handwriting on a clean sheet of paper, and Tom Barrett signed it, and the doc signed it, and William signed it, and Eleanor witnessed it. "I'll keep a copy in my medical bag," Doc Whitmore said, "and you keep the original, and Tom keeps the third." He capped his pen. "If Caldwell comes at this in court, he's going to have to explain how a stake that's been in the ground since 1879 ended up in the wrong place." "He'll try," William said. "Let him try," Tom said, with the equanimity of a man who has spent years shoeing horses and has developed a very sturdy tolerance for other people's nonsense. "I've lived in this town for 14 years, and I've watched Richard Caldwell take from people who couldn't fight back. Be nice to watch him run into someone who can." He looked at Eleanor when he said it. She looked back at him steadily. She did not comment. But she felt something quiet and sure, and a little like standing on solid ground after a long time of uncertain footing. Word got around town. Of course it did. By the following Wednesday, Eleanor could feel the shift when she went in for supplies, a change in the quality of the attention, less the sharp-edged curiosity of people watching a spectacle, and more the cautious reassessment of people who have received new information and are not yet sure what to do with it. Martha Hale passed her on the boardwalk and nodded. Not warmly, but deliberately. The nod of a woman revising her position. The more interesting encounter was with Clara Simmons, who ran the post office and had the alert, interested eyes of a person who processed all information in and out of Red Hollow both officially and unofficially. "Miss Hayes," Clara said, when Eleanor came in with a letter to post, a careful, measured letter to the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne, outlining the discrepancy in the survey measurements and requesting clarification of the process for filing a counter-complaint. "I hear you've been helping Mr. Carter with some paperwork." "Some," Eleanor said. "Legal-type paperwork." "Survey documents," Eleanor said. "It's a technical matter." Clara looked at her with the frank appraisal of someone who has decided to stop circling and land. "My husband had a land dispute with Caldwell 4 years ago," she said. "A boundary question on the north property. He lost." A pause. "He lost because he didn't know what he was looking at in those papers, and Caldwell had a lawyer from Cheyenne who did." She slid Eleanor's letter into the outgoing basket. "I'm glad someone in this town finally knows what they're looking at." Eleanor met her eyes. "I'm sorry about your husband's land, Mrs. Simmons." "So am I." Clara closed this basket. "You let me know if there's anything the post office can do. I mean that." It was the first genuinely offered hand Eleanor had received in Red Hollow, and she received it the way she received most things, with a quiet gratitude that didn't spill over into demonstration. "I will," she said. "Thank you." She did not tell William about the conversation with Clara Simmons right away. She turned it over in her mind on the walk back to the wagon, adding it to the growing inventory of things she was learning about this town, its fault lines and its loyalties, and the particular resentment that had been building quietly under the surface of Red Hollow's ordinary days, like water under rock. Richard Caldwell had been taking from people for a long time. Clara Simmons wasn't the only one. She was certain of that. What she wasn't certain of yet was how to use it. She was thinking about it when she climbed back onto the wagon and found William waiting with the reins in his hands and a look on his face that told her something had happened in the 20 minutes she'd been in the post office. "What?" she said. "Caldwell's been to the bank," he said. She stilled. "Howard Webb, he runs the Merchants Bank, came and found me at the feed store. Said Caldwell came in this morning and spoke to him about acquiring unpatented riverside land. Said he's planning to file an improvement claim." His jaw was set. "He's moving faster than I thought." "He knew we'd start fighting back," Eleanor said. "He came to your ranch to see how much time he had. He's decided he doesn't have much." She thought quickly. "How long before the circuit judge comes through?" 6 weeks, first week of September. "And Caldwell's filing?" "Webb thinks he'll file the improvement claim by end of the month." "That gives us less than 4 weeks to get our counter documentation to Cheyenne and have it received and logged before his filing." She looked at him. The letter I just sent starts that process. But we need someone who knows the territorial land law better than I do. Does Red Hollow have a lawyer? Harlan Cross. He handles mostly wills and property transfers, not a man who goes to court. Has he read a land patent dispute before? I have no idea. I'll talk to him, she said. Eleanor. I'll talk to him, she said again more firmly. William, I need you to understand something. Caldwell is betting that you'll run out of time before you can mount a proper defense. He's betting that a rancher managing 30 head alone doesn't have the hours in the day to also fight a legal battle. He's right about the hours. She looked at him directly. Which means you manage the ranch, and I manage the fight. Can you let me do that? He was quiet for a long moment. You're not my housekeeper anymore, he said. There was no complaint in it. It was an observation. I'm still making your supper, she said. Something crossed his face, that almost thing, that was almost a smile. All right, he said. He handed her the reins. You drive, I'll think. She drove. Harlan Cross turned out to be a small, precise man in his 60s who lived above his office and had the organized, dusty quality of someone who had spent decades surrounded by paper and had made his peace with it. He received Eleanor on a Thursday morning with the polite wariness of a man who was not accustomed to women arriving at his office alone to discuss territorial land law. That wariness lasted approximately 8 minutes. She laid the documents on his desk, the original survey, the measurements, the witness statement, the copy of what she understood Caldwell's filing to contain, and she walked him through the discrepancy with the precision of a woman who had spent 4 nights reading everything she could find in William's small collection of legal and survey books. Harlan Cross stopped being wary somewhere around the 3rd document. By the time she finished, he was leaning forward with his reading glasses on, and his expression had the bright, absorbed look of a man encountering a problem worth solving. The Creek Fork measurement, he said. That's your anchor. That's what I thought. Caldwell's survey can't explain that without claiming the stake was moved. And if he claims it was moved, then he's alleging tampering, which requires evidence which he doesn't have because the stake was placed in 1879 and has been sitting in the ground undisturbed for 8 years. Harlan Cross looked at her over his glasses. Where did you learn survey law, Miss Hayes? My father was a land agent, she said, and I read quickly. He sat back. I need to write to my colleague in Cheyenne, man named Alderton. He handles territorial disputes, and he is considerably better in a courtroom than I am. He tapped the witness statement. This is good work. Whoever put this together understood what they needed. Doc Whitmore did the measuring. I knew what to ask him to record. Well, he picked up a pen. Tell Carter he's got a case. It's not guaranteed Caldwell has money and Cheyenne connections, and he'll hire capable people. But the evidence is on Carter's right side of this. He looked up. And the woman who found it is sitting in my office, which is the most useful thing that's happened in this building in 6 months. Eleanor gathered her copies. How much will it cost to file a formal counter-complaint? He named a figure. She didn't flinch. I'll have it to you by Friday, she said. She was not certain how, but she was going to find it. She found it the way she found most things, by being honest and direct and trusting that the same quality in others would meet her halfway. She went to Doc Whitmore first because she had already seen that he was a man who acted on principle rather than social calculation. She explained what Harlan Cross had said and what filing the complaint would cost and why it mattered not just for William, but for every person in Red Hollow who had ever lost ground to Richard Caldwell's careful, relentless maneuvering. The doc listened. He didn't interrupt. Clara Simmons, he said when she finished. You talk to her. She offered to help. Clara's husband isn't the only one Caldwell's taken from, Doc said. There are 4 families in this county who lost boundary disputes in the last 10 years, every one of them to surveyors Caldwell hired. He pulled out his ledger. I'll cover 1/3 of the filing fee. Talk to Clara, and talk to Ed Marsh. He farms the eastern section, lost 12 acres to Caldwell in '83. He's been waiting for someone to pick a fight. I'm not picking a fight, Eleanor said. No, Doc said. He closed his ledger. You're finishing one that Caldwell started. That's different. He looked at her with the frank assessing gaze of a man who has measured people for a long time. "You're not what Red Hollow expected, Miss Hayes." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." She had the filing fee by Thursday evening. Clara Simmons contributed without hesitation. Ed Marsh, a weathered, quiet man, who said fewer words per minute than even William, arrived at the ranch on Wednesday evening, sat down at the kitchen table, and slid an envelope across it without commentary. "Caldwell took 12 acres that were my father's," he said. "Field that my father broke ground on with his own hands." He looked at the envelope. "Whatever this buys, I hope it's worth more than 12 acres. "It might be," Eleanor said carefully. "I can't promise." "I'm not asking for promises." He stood up. "I'm asking for a fair fight. That's what we're trying to give you." He nodded. He left. William came in from the barn 10 minutes later and found Eleanor sitting at the table with the full envelope and 4 other smaller ones arranged in front of her, tallied in her neat handwriting on the sheet of paper beside them. He stood in the doorway. "Eleanor," he said. "It's covered," she said. "The filing fee. And Harlan Cross is writing to his colleague in Cheyenne tonight." "Where?" "This town," she said, "has been waiting for a long time for someone to stand up to Richard Caldwell. I simply asked." She looked up at him. "I told you, I'm not a charity case, and neither are you." He crossed the room and sat down across from her. He looked at the envelopes. He looked at her. "Doc Whitmore," he said. It wasn't a question. "And Clara Simmons, and Ed Marsh, and 2 others I'll tell you about when the legal process is further along, because they asked for discretion, and I intend to give it." She stacked the envelopes and slid them into the small cash box she'd found in the study. "The point is, Caldwell has been operating in this town as though he's alone in it, as though the people around him don't talk to each other. He forgot that people who've been hurt by the same man eventually find each other." William looked at her for a long time. Not the careful, contained look she was accustomed to from him, something more open than that. Something that made her look away first. "I've been alone out here for a long time," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I forgot that was an option," he said. "People, finding each other." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, something called once in the summer dark, a bird far off, and fell silent. "William," she met his eyes. "What you did for me at that station, what you offered when nobody else moved, I haven't forgotten it. I won't." She held his gaze steadily. "Whatever this cost you, I intend to make sure it was worth something." He was very still. "It already is," he said. The words came out quieter than she thought he intended. He seemed to realize it, and he looked at the table, and a beat passed, and then he said, "You should get some rest. You've been working since before dawn." "So have you." "I'm used to it." "Nobody should be used to it," she said, and stood up. She was at the kitchen doorway when he spoke again. "The garden," he said. She turned. "The beans you planted." His voice was careful, measured. "They're coming up. I saw them this morning." A pause. "I thought you should know." It was not a dramatic statement. It was not a declaration of anything larger than itself. But it was William Carter, who had lived alone for 6 years and spoken to no one about anything small or personal, telling her that he had noticed her work and thought about her enough to carry the observation through a whole day and give it to her at the end. Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen in the lamplight. "Thank you," she said. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a moment before she lit the lamp. The beans were coming up. She had planted them knowing she might not be here to harvest them. She had planted them because the garden should get planted regardless, because some things are worth doing for their own sake, independent of whether you get to see what they become. She was beginning to think that maybe she would get to see. The letter from Caldwell arrived on a Friday morning. Not a personal letter. A legal letter delivered through Harlan Cross's office on paper, with a Cheyenne letterhead, and the name of a law firm that Eleanor did not recognize, but whose address was on the prominent commercial street that she associated from her father's accounts with serious money and serious intent. Harlan Cross brought it out to the ranch himself, which told her something about how he read it. He sat at the kitchen table and laid it flat and said, "He's accelerated his timeline. The filing is done. Not an improvement claim, he went straight for a land patent challenge." Claims the original 1879 survey was conducted by an unlicensed surveyor and is therefore invalid. Eleanor read the letter. She read it twice. "The surveyor who did the original county survey," she said. "Was he licensed? That's the question." Harlan folded his hands on the table. "His name was James Orton. I was the county-appointed surveyor in 1879. In 1879, Wyoming Territory did not require formal licensure for county-appointed surveyors. In 1882, the territory passed a licensure requirement." He paused. "Caldwell is arguing that without licensure, the 1879 survey has no legal standing. That's—" She stopped herself. "Can he do that? Apply a 1882 requirement retroactively to a 1879 survey? He can argue it. Whether a territorial judge agrees is another question." "It's bad faith," William said from the doorway. He had been standing there long enough to have heard most of it. He came in and sat down. "It's designed to tie this up until I can't afford to keep fighting." "That's almost certainly the strategy," Harlan agreed. "But Miss Hayes—" He turned to her. "The letter from Alderton in Cheyenne came this morning as well." He produced a second envelope. "He's reviewed the file. He says there is settled territorial law on retroactive application of licensure requirements. He also says—" He opened the letter and read that the witness documented measurement discrepancy constitutes independent grounds for challenging the Caldwell survey, regardless of the licensing question. He looked up. "He'll take the case. He wants to meet with Carter before the circuit judge arrives." 6 weeks, William said. 5 now, Harlan said. Eleanor looked at William. William looked at Eleanor. "Then we go to Cheyenne," she said. "I can't leave the ranch for 2 days," she said. "Ed Marsh offered to look after things. He has boys. We go to Cheyenne, we meet with Alderton. We make sure he has everything he needs, and we come back." She looked at him calmly. "You are not going to lose this ranch, William. Not to a man like Caldwell, and not to a legal argument designed to exhaust you into giving up. But I need you to let me help you fight it." The silence in the kitchen had a particular quality. The quality of a man who has been alone so long that the experience of not being alone anymore is something he doesn't quite have the language for yet. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Harlan Cross looked between the two of them with the carefully neutral expression of a man who is noticing something he has decided it is not his place to remark on. "I'll write to Alderton today," he said. "Tell him to expect you." He gathered his papers and left them there at the kitchen table. The survey documents spread between them, the summer afternoon pressing warm through the windows, and Red Hollow going about its ordinary business outside, entirely unaware that in a ranch kitchen 3 miles east of town, 2 people who had each arrived at this moment from a long road of loneliness were sitting across from each other and beginning in the careful way of people who have been hurt before to trust that the ground beneath them would hold. The beans in the garden were coming up. And somewhere in Cheyenne, a man named Caldwell was building his case. He had no idea what was coming for him. The road to Cheyenne was 60 miles of hard summer ground, and they left before sunrise. William drove. Eleanor sat beside him with the document satchel on her lap. The original survey, the witness measurement, the Alderton correspondence. Everything Harlan Cross had told them to bring, organized in the order a lawyer would want to see it. She had been awake since 2 in the morning, making sure nothing was missing. She had checked it 3 times. William had said nothing when she climbed onto the wagon with the satchel already in her hands. He had simply clicked the horse forward and let her be. That was one of the things she had come to understand about him in the weeks since she'd arrived. He did not require explanation for preparation. He recognized competence when he saw it, and he did not feel the need to comment on it, which was in Eleanor's experience rarer in a man than it ought to be. They rode in the early dark, with the summer stars still visible on the western edge of the sky, and the air had that particular quality. It gets in Wyoming before the heat of the day arrives clean and cool, and carrying the smell of sage, and neither of them spoke for the first several miles. "Ed Marsh knows what to do with the horses," Eleanor asked eventually. "He knows." And the garden, the beans need water if it doesn't rain by Thursday. I told Jake Barrett. He'll check. She nodded. She looked at the road. You've done this before, William said. Managed a complicated situation with a lot of pieces. It wasn't quite a question. My father's illness lasted 4 years, she said. The last 2 he couldn't manage his affairs. I did it. She shifted the satchel. Land records, creditor correspondence, negotiations with men who assumed that because I was a woman, they could offer me less than the debt was worth, and I'd accept it out of desperation. She paused. I didn't accept it. What did you do? I read everything they sent me twice before I responded to any of it. I wrote letters that were more precise than the ones they wrote me. I documented everything. A beat. I still lost the property. There wasn't enough left to save it, but I lost it on the correct terms with every debt settled honestly and every record clean. She looked at the road ahead. When my father died, there was nothing left, but there was nothing dishonest either. I kept that much. William was quiet for a moment. How long ago? He asked. 14 months. Another silence. The wagon rolled forward. I'm sorry, he said. So am I. She didn't elaborate. She had learned in the past weeks that William Carter understood the shape of grief without needing it explained, and she did not need to fill the space with words. They rode on. Cheyenne arrived in the late afternoon, loud and crowded, and nothing like Red Hollow. Eleanor had been here once before, years ago, and she remembered it as a place of noise and ambition, a city still deciding what it was going to become, adding buildings and rail lines and arguments at a pace that suggested it was in a hurry to find out. Alderton's office was on Commerce Street, 3rd floor of a brick building that had the prosperous, permanent look of a practice that had been profitable for a long time. The man himself was younger than Eleanor expected, mid-40s, compact and quick-moving, with the focused energy of someone who processes information fast and makes decisions faster. He shook William's hand, and then turned to Eleanor with the attentive, appraising look of a man deciding how seriously to take her. She set the document satchel on his desk, opened it, and placed the survey documents in front of him in order. The Creek Fork measurement is the anchor, she said. Everything else builds from there. He picked up the witness statement. He read it. He picked up the original survey. He read that. He was quiet for 90 seconds, she counted, and then he looked up. You found this yourself, he said. Yes. Legal background? None. My father was a land agent. I grew up reading survey documents. He looked at her for one more second. Then he turned to William. Mr. Carter, he said, your housekeeper just gave you your best defense. He sat back. Here's the situation. Caldwell's challenge on the licensure question is not frivolous. Territorial judges have gone both ways on retroactive application. Some hold that a survey done in good faith under the rules of its time stands regardless of later requirements. Others have been persuaded that subsequent standards apply. He tapped the witness statement. What this does is give us a second and independent line of defense that bypasses the licensure argument entirely. Even if the judge agreed with Caldwell on the 1879 survey, which I will fight, the physical evidence of the fraudulent measurement stands on its own. Can he challenge the measurement? William asked. He'll try. He'll claim the stake was moved, or that the measurement was conducted incorrectly, or that the witnesses are biased. Alderton looked at the statement again. A physician and a livery owner. That's good. A judge will trust a physician's precision and a working man's common sense. Who else was present? Carter's ranch hand, Jake Barrett, Eleanor said. He's 16. I'd save him for rebuttal rather than primary testimony. A judge will take Doc Whitmore's word before a boy's, but the boy confirms the count. Alderton looked at her again. This time, the look held something that moved past assessment into something closer to professional recognition. Miss Hayes, he said, have you considered the law as a career? Wyoming doesn't admit women to the bar, she said. Not yet, he said. So, they stayed in Cheyenne one night at a boarding house near the rail depot. Separate rooms, a fact that Eleanor had confirmed before agreeing to the arrangement, because she was aware of exactly how this journey would be interpreted back in Red Hollow, and she was not going to give that town additional ammunition. William ate supper at the boarding house dining table with the contained, watchful look of a man in a crowded place who is managing his discomfort. Eleanor sat across from him and talked about what Alderton had said. The strategy, the timeline, the specific language Alderton planned to use when the circuit judge arrived in Red Hollow, and William listened and asked precise questions and ate his food without tasting it. She could tell, because he was that focused on what she was saying. "He thinks we can win," she said. "He thinks we have a strong case," William said. "That's not the same thing." "No, but it's more than we had 2 weeks ago." She looked at him. "You're worried." "I'm always worried about the ranch. It's a working ranch. Worrying is part of it." "That's not what I mean." He was quiet. "You're worried that winning isn't enough," she said. "That even if the judge rules in your favor, Caldwell finds another angle, another surveyor, another filing." He looked at his plate. "Men like him don't stop because they lose once." "No," she agreed. "They don't." She set down her fork. "Which is why the legal case has to be so thorough and so public that coming after you again would cost him more than the land is worth." She leaned forward slightly. "Alderton said that 3 other families in the county have open grievances with surveys Caldwell initiated. He's looking into whether they can be consolidated." William looked up. "One case involving one rancher," Eleanor said, "is a dispute. 5 cases involving 5 families, all with the same pattern, all with the same surveyor, that's fraud. And fraud in territorial land filings is a federal matter, not a circuit court matter." The silence that followed was the kind that comes when a statement rearranges the furniture of a situation. "Federal," William said. "Alderton is being cautious about it. He said he needs more documentation from the other families before he'd use that word in front of a judge. But he used it with us." She held his gaze. "This is bigger than your south boundary, William. It may have always been bigger than your south boundary. Caldwell's been running the same play in this county for 10 years. You just happen to be the one who got a woman with a land agent father and nothing left to lose." Something moved through his expression. She had learned to read the language of his face, the small vocabulary of a man who expressed a great deal through very little, and what she saw now was something she hadn't seen there before. Not just the watchful calculation she'd become familiar with. Something that went deeper. "Nothing left to lose," he repeated. "That's what I said. You have things to lose now," he said quietly. "You've put yourself in the middle of this. If Caldwell, if he decides to come at the people who are standing against him." "He can try," she said. The words were even and direct, and she meant every one of them. "Eleanor." He said her name in the particular way he had recently begun using it, not as address, but as something more personal than that. A word that meant, "I see you, and I am concerned about you, and I do not know how to say either of those things directly. You came to Red Hollow with 1 suitcase and no options. I am grateful, more grateful than I know how to say, for everything you've done. But this is my fight. I don't want you standing in front of it because you feel obligated." "I feel nothing of the kind," she said. He stopped. "I am standing in front of it," she said carefully, "because it is the right thing to do, and because I am capable of doing it, and because someone should." She looked at him steadily. "And because this ranch, your ranch, has been the first place safe. And I am not interested in watching Richard Caldwell take it." She picked up her fork. "So let's finish eating and get some sleep. We have a long drive back and a circuit judge in 5 weeks. William looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork too. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They were 2 miles outside Red Hollow on the return drive when Eleanor saw the smoke. She saw it before William did, a thin column of dark rising against the afternoon sky in the direction of the ranch, and her stomach dropped cold and immediate before her mind had even finished identifying what she was seeing. "William." He looked. He saw it. His hands tightened on the reins and the horse felt it and moved faster without being asked. "That's east," he said. His voice had gone very flat. "That's the east pasture." "How far from the barn?" "Quarter mile, maybe." "Drive," she said. He drove. The fire had taken the fence line along the eastern boundary, 300 yards of post and rail that William had spent the previous spring replacing bone dry from the summer, and gone fast. Jake Barrett was there with 2 buckets and the terrified energy of a 16-year-old who has been managing a fire alone for 20 minutes and knows it is more than he can handle. Ed Marsh appeared from the south pasture at a run when he heard the wagon, and between the 4 of them, William, moving with the calm ferocity of a man who has fought prairie fires before Eleanor, at the pump relay that Jake had started Ed Marsh beating at the edges with a wet feed sack, they had it contained in another 40 minutes. The fence was gone. The grass on the eastern edge of the pasture was scorched black. The barn was untouched. William stood at the edge of the burn line and looked at what remained. His face was still with the particular stillness that Eleanor had learned to read as something other than calm. "How did it start?" she asked. She already suspected the answer. Jake Barrett was very quiet for a moment. He was looking at the ground. "Jake," William said. "I don't know for certain," Jake said. He looked up. He was trying to be careful with his words and not quite managing it. "I saw a rider on the East Road, maybe 2 hours ago. I didn't think anything of it because riders use that road. But then about 20 minutes after I smelled—" He stopped. "The grass was real dry, Mr. Carter. Real dry." "A rider," William said. "I didn't recognize him. He was moving fast." William turned and looked at Eleanor. She held his gaze. Neither of them said the name. They didn't need to. "Ed," William said without taking his eyes off Eleanor. "Any damage to the south fence while we were gone?" Ed Marsh was quiet for a beat. "Someone pulled 2 stakes." "Which stakes?" A pause. "South corner. The ones near the creek fork." The air between William and Eleanor went very still. The creek fork stakes. The ones they had measured from. The physical evidence that anchored their entire legal case. "Were they pulled completely?" Eleanor asked. "Tried to be," Ed said. "Dirt was disturbed. But whoever did it didn't have enough time. They're still in the ground." He looked at William steadily. "I reset them and put a rock cairn around them. Nobody touches those stakes without moving 100 pounds of rock first." Eleanor let out a breath. William said nothing for a moment. She watched him absorb the full picture: the fire, as distraction, the attempt on the stakes, the timing of it, 2 days after they'd left for Cheyenne, and 2 days after Caldwell would have had time to learn they'd met with a Cheyenne lawyer. "He knows," William said. "He knows what we filed, and he knows what our defense is." "He has someone in Cheyenne," Eleanor said. "Someone who watched us go into Alderton's office, or someone at the land office who told him the counter-complaint was received. Either way," she met his eye. "He's frightened. This is what frightened men do. They stop trying to outmaneuver you and they start trying to destroy what you're standing on. He tried to destroy the evidence. He failed." She said it clearly, deliberately, for William and for herself. "The stakes are in the ground. The witness statement is in Alderton's office in Cheyenne, and in Harlan Cross's office in Red Hollow, and in my document satchel, which never left my hands for 2 days. He cannot unfile what we've filed." She looked at him. "But we need to go to Sheriff Harding tonight. Tonight, William. The fire. The tampered stakes. We report every single thing, and we do it before Caldwell has a chance to get in front of this." William was quiet for one long moment. Then he turned to Jake. "You did well," he said. "Keeping it from the barn. That took courage." Jake Barrett, who was 16 and had been running buckets alone for 20 minutes and was still slightly ash-covered, straightened at those words in the way a young man straightens when a man he respects acknowledges him. "Yes, sir," he said. "Go home. Tell your father what happened. Tell him I'll be in touch." William turned to Ed Marsh. "Thank you for the stakes. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," Ed said. "You owe Caldwell a reckoning. That's different." William looked at Eleanor. "You ready?" "I've been ready," she said. Sheriff George Harding had been the law in Red Hollow for 11 years. He was a methodical man, not brilliant, not ambitious, but honest. In the way that some people are honest simply because dishonesty requires more energy than they're willing to expend. Eleanor had assessed him on her second week in town and filed him under capable but cautious. He was the kind of man who needed evidence presented to him in the right order. She let William do most of the talking, because she understood that Sheriff Harding was more comfortable receiving information from a man he'd known for 8 years than from a woman who had arrived in his town 3 months ago. This was not a principle she agreed with, but it was a reality she could work with. William reported the fire, the tampered stakes, Jake Barrett's account of the rider, Ed Marsh's discovery. Harding listened with his hands flat on his desk and his face very carefully neutral. "That's a serious set of accusations," he said when William finished. "I'm not accusing anyone," William said, which was a sentence Eleanor had specifically coached him on during the wagon ride back. "I'm reporting what happened on my property and asking you to investigate. The rider Jake saw. Jake couldn't identify him. I'm not asking you to arrest anyone. I'm asking you to create a record." William held his gaze. "If something else happens, if there's another fire, another tampered stake, anything else on my property, I want a record that shows this is a pattern and not an accident." Harding was quiet. "George." William said it quietly, the way a man speaks to someone he's known long enough to use a first name. "You've been sheriff here for 11 years. You know who has the motive and the resources for something like this. Motive and resources aren't evidence." "No," William agreed. "They're not. Which is why I'm asking you to help me get evidence." Another silence. Then Harding picked up his pen. "Tell me about the stakes again," he said. "From the beginning." They left the sheriff's office at dusk. The main street of Red Hollow was going quiet with the end of the business day. Storefronts closing, horses being walked to the livery. The last of the afternoon customers making their way home. Eleanor walked beside William and felt the exhaustion of the past 40 hours settling into her bones, the particular weight of too much happening too fast with no space to stop and breathe between events. William stopped walking. She stopped beside him. Richard Caldwell was across the street. He was standing outside his dry goods store in conversation with 2 men. Eleanor didn't recognize, not local men by the look of them. 2 well-dressed for ranch work, with the self-contained manner of men who traveled for professional purposes. One of them was carrying a leather document case. Caldwell saw them at the same moment they saw him. The conversation across the street went still. And then Richard Caldwell looked at Eleanor, not at William, at Eleanor, with an expression that she had not seen on his face before. Not the contempt from the station platform. Not the smooth calculation from his visit to the ranch. Something colder and more focused than either of those things. It was the look of a man who has decided that a particular problem has become serious enough to require serious attention. She held his gaze. She did not look away first. William's hand came up and touched her elbow, not grabbing, not pulling, just a light, deliberate pressure that said, "I am here," without making a production of it. Caldwell turned back to the men beside him and said something she couldn't hear. The man with the document case nodded. They moved together into the dry goods store and the door closed. "Who are those men?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know," William said. "The one with the case. He's a lawyer, or a land agent, someone professional." She turned it over in her mind. He's escalating. The fire, the stakes, and now outside lawyers. He's not slowing down. No. He's scared. Maybe. "Frightened men make mistakes," she said. "We need to make sure we're ready for his." William looked at her. In the fading daylight, his face held something she was only beginning to fully understand. Not just the quiet strength she'd read from the first day, but something under it, something that the 6 years of solitude and the loss of Catherine and the grinding weight of fighting alone had not quite managed to extinguish. Something patient and stubborn and deeply essentially good. "Come home," he said. It was a simple sentence. He said it without apparently noticing how much it contained. She noticed. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." The knock on the front door came 3 days later at 7 in the morning. William was in the barn. Eleanor answered it. The man on the porch was not someone she'd seen before. Mid-50s, narrow-faced, with the precise bearing of someone accustomed to official business. He held a folded document in one hand. "Miss Hayes," he said. "Yes." I'm looking for William Carter. He's on the property. What's this regarding? The man looked at her with the assessing gaze of someone deciding how much to tell a woman. He apparently decided enough. My name is Prescott. I'm a process server from the Territorial Court in Cheyenne. He held out the document. Mr. Carter is being served with an injunction. She took the document. She unfolded it. She read it standing in the doorway with the morning sun on the page, and her face gave away nothing at all, because she was a woman who had learned to read bad news without showing it on her face, and this was bad news. What does it say? William said from behind her. She hadn't heard him come in from the barn. She turned. Caldwell has filed for an emergency injunction, she said. Her voice was steady. He's asking the Territorial Court to freeze all land use on the disputed south boundary acreage pending resolution of his patent challenge. That includes... She looked back at the document. The south pasture, the river access, the cattle watering rights. William went very still. He can't do that, he said. That land is mine. He's done it, she said. It doesn't mean he wins. An injunction is not a judgment, it's a delay tactic. She looked at him. But if the cattle can't access the river water? I've got 30 head, William said. The implications moved through his voice. In summer, in Wyoming, without river access they need the well and the stock tanks, and in this heat, I know. She folded the document. I need to write to Alderton immediately, today. This goes out on the Morning Post. She was already moving to the study. Alderton can file for an emergency counter motion. An injunction requires a showing of immediate irreparable harm to the applicant. Caldwell has to convince a judge that allowing you to use your own land while the dispute is pending would harm him. That's a difficult argument. How long does a counter motion take? She stopped walking and turned back to face him honestly. I don't know, she said. Days, maybe longer. Alderton will know the judge and the timeline better than I do. William stood in the middle of his kitchen with the process server's paperwork in his hands and 30 head of cattle on summer pasture and 5 weeks until the circuit judge arrived in Red Hollow, and Eleanor watched him do the math she was already doing herself. He's trying to starve you out, she said quietly. Not the cattle, you. He wants the legal costs and the emergency response to exhaust your money and your attention before the hearing. He wants you to be a man who has been scrambling for weeks by the time you stand in front of a judge. He might succeed, William said. Not defeat in it, just the flat acknowledgement of a man who looks at a problem honestly. He might, Eleanor said, but not if we don't give him the weeks he's counting on. She turned back toward the study. Write to Ed Marsh. Tell him what's happened. Ed has a well and a stock tank on the north section he told me last month when we were measuring. Ask him if he'll share water access as an emergency arrangement while the injunction is pending. Tom Barrett has the property adjacent on the east. Eleanor. She stopped. You're... He paused. He looked at her. Something in his face had the quality of a man who is trying to say something precise and is not accustomed to the vocabulary. You've given everything you have to this, your time, your knowledge. You've gone to Cheyenne and talked to lawyers and gone to the sheriff and raised money from people in this town that you'd barely met 3 months ago. He set the document on the table. And now he's bringing this to you too, to your door, because you're standing with me. I need you to know that I... He stopped again. She waited. I would not have you hurt, he said. Because of me. Because of my land. I would not have that. The kitchen was very quiet. She crossed the room and picked up the document from the table. She held it for a moment. Do you know what I had, she said, when I arrived here? 1 suitcase. No money. No family. No plan beyond the next 24 hours. She looked at him. And you stepped off a boardwalk and offered me a chance. You didn't do it for gratitude. You didn't do it for anything. You just couldn't watch something wrong happen and do nothing. She held out the document. That's why I'm standing here, William. Because you showed me what standing up looks like. She let him take the paper. So let me stand up. He looked at the document in his hand. He looked at her. The letter to Alderton, he said finally. I'll write it now. I'll write to Ed Marsh. Good. She turned to go. "And Eleanor." His voice stopped her at the doorway. She looked back. "The apple cake," he said. His voice was careful and deliberate. "You made it last Tuesday when things were bad. It helped. A beat. I thought you should know that." It was not about apple cake. They both knew it was not about apple cake. It was a man who had spent 6 years alone telling a woman in the only language he currently had available that her presence in his life had become something he depended on without meaning to something that had slipped past his defenses in the quiet domestic hours when he wasn't paying attention. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "I'll make another one," she said, "after we send the letters." He nodded. She went to write the most important letter she had ever written, and behind her she heard William Carter sit down at the kitchen table to write his, and the particular quality of the silence that followed was the silence of two people working together in the same house toward the same purpose, which is one of the quietest and most powerful things in the world. Alderton's response arrived in 4 days. It was not what Eleanor had hoped for. She read it at the kitchen table with William standing beside her, and she kept her face very still. The territorial court had reviewed Caldwell's injunction application, Alderton wrote. The reviewing magistrate, not the circuit judge, who would hear the full case, but an administrative magistrate in Cheyenne, had granted a partial injunction, not a full freeze on land use, but specifically, no improvements, no new fencing, no new infrastructure on the disputed southern acreage pending the full hearing. The cattle watering rights remained intact. That was a relief, but a narrow one. He got what he really wanted, William said. He was reading over her shoulder. He got part of what he wanted, she said. The watering access holds. The cattle are safe. But no new fencing, no improvements. He straightened. You know what that means. She did. The south fence, the same line they'd been fighting over from the beginning, needed significant repair before winter. Without being able to fence that boundary, William's cattle could drift. Without a maintained fence line, his claim to productive use of the land was harder to demonstrate. He's not trying to win in court, she said slowly. She said it as she realized it working through it. He's trying to make the land unusable. If your cattle drift and your fence falls, and you can't demonstrate active use and maintenance, a judge could rule that the land has been effectively abandoned. Adverse possession, William said. He knew the term. Of course he did. He'd been thinking about this. Alderton will know how to counter that argument, she said. But we have 2 weeks until the circuit judge arrives, and we cannot improve that fence line. She tapped the letter. He planned this, all of it. The fire was to create chaos. The injunction was to create legal paralysis. He's been playing this longer than we realized. She set the letter down. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at William with the expression he had come to recognize, the particular focused stillness that meant she had seen something. The families, she said. The other 4 families with Caldwell survey disputes. Has Alderton reached them yet? He said he was working on it. I need him to work faster. She stood up. Because if those families have experienced the same pattern, fire injunctions, pressure tactics, then this is not a land dispute anymore. It is a coordinated scheme. And a coordinated scheme of land fraud in territorial Wyoming is not heard by a circuit court judge. She met his eyes. It is heard by a federal court. William stared at her. And Richard Caldwell, she said, does not have enough lawyers or enough money to make federal land fraud charges disappear. The silence that followed was the longest and the most charged that had ever occupied William Carter's kitchen. Can you prove it? He said. Not yet, she said. But I know where to look. She picked up her shawl. I'm going to see Clara Simmons, and then I'm going to see Ed Marsh, and then I am going to write the most detailed letter Alderton has ever received. She looked at him. Do not let anyone near those stakes. She walked out the door, and Richard Caldwell, 30 head of cattle away, and a comfort of courtroom procedures, distant, had no idea that the woman he had left standing alone on a train platform 3 months ago had just become the most dangerous person in Red Hollow. Clara Simmons had been running the Red Hollow post office for 9 years, and in 9 years she had developed the particular skill of a woman who handles other people's correspondence. She knew without opening a single letter who was writing to whom and how often, and what the volume and urgency of that correspondence suggested about the state of things. She had been watching Eleanor Hayes's outgoing mail for 2 months. She knew the letters went to Cheyenne. She knew the return correspondence arrived in thick envelopes that Eleanor always collected personally, never sent Jake Barrett to pick up. She knew the frequency had increased in the past 3 weeks. 3 letters out in a single week. 2 responses back. One of the responses carrying a territorial court seal that Clara had recognized immediately because she had seen that seal before on the papers that had arrived the year James lost his 12 acres. She had been waiting for Eleanor to come to her with the full picture. Eleanor walked through this post office door on a Tuesday morning, and Clara looked up from the sorting table and said, "Sit down, I'll make coffee." Eleanor sat. Clara poured 2 cups and sat across from her and said, "Tell me everything." So Eleanor did. She told Clara about the fraudulent survey measurement, the witness documentation, Alderton in Cheyenne, the fire on the east fence line and the tampered stakes, the injunction and what it was designed to accomplish. And then, carefully watching Clara's face, she told her about the pattern she'd been tracing. The other families. The same surveyor. The same sequence of events. The same result. Clara's face did not change much while Eleanor talked. She had the stillness of a woman who had already grieved her version of this story and come out the other side into something cooler and more purposeful. When Eleanor finished, Clara set down her coffee cup. "Frank Dooley," she said. "Lost 20 acres on the north section in 1884. Same surveyor as James. He's been farming the reduced property ever since, and he doesn't talk about it, but his wife Sarah does to me because she has to talk to someone." She looked at Eleanor steadily. "Henry Croft, southeast section. Lost his river access in 1885. Not a full acreage dispute, just the access strip, but without the river, his irrigation was cut, and he had to sell 2 years later because the crops failed." A pause. "And Margaret Aldine, she's a widow, runs the small sheep property on the western boundary. She fought Caldwell for 8 months in 1883, and she lost. And she has every document from that fight in a box under her bed, because she told me once she kept them in case the day ever came." Eleanor looked at her. "You've known," Eleanor said. "Not accusatory, just recognizing it." "I've known that something was wrong," Clara said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have a lawyer's letter from Cheyenne or a woman who could read survey documents." She held Eleanor's gaze. "I have them now. I need to talk to all of them," Eleanor said. "Margaret Aldine especially, if she kept her documents. Those are evidence, real evidence, pattern evidence." She leaned forward. "Clara, if we can show that the same surveyor made the same type of fraudulent measurement in 5 separate cases over 10 years, all resulting in land loss to the same man, that is not a series of boundary disputes. That is a conspiracy." Clara was very quiet. "James," she said. "It was just the name." The weight of it filled the sentence. "I know," Eleanor said. "I know it won't give the land back, but it might stop it from happening to anyone else." Clara stood up. She pulled off her post office apron and hung it on the hook with the decisive movement of a woman who has just reclassified something from someone else's problem to her own. "Margaret Aldine's place is 2 miles west," she said. "I'll drive you." Margaret Aldine was 63 years old and had the unhurried manner of a woman who had outlasted most of the things that were supposed to defeat her. She received them at her kitchen table with coffee she'd apparently already been making when she heard the wagon, because in a community this sparse, the sound of company approaching carries. She listened to Eleanor without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, Margaret got up and went to the back of the house and came back with a wooden box that had been painted blue once and was now mostly a memory of blue. She set it on the table and opened it. The documents were organized. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. Not stuffed in haphazardly, not crumpled from years of being handled in distress, but organized, sorted by date and type. The way a woman organizes things when she knows she's keeping them for a reason and wants them to be ready when the reason arrives. "I always thought someone would come eventually," Margaret said. She sat back down. "I just didn't know who." Eleanor went through the box with the focused efficiency of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. And there on the third document from the top, a survey addendum filed in 1883, she found it. The Creek Fork. Not the same Creek Fork as William's property. A different watershed entirely on the western section of the county. But the same measurement error. The same type of discrepancy, a stated distance to a fixed natural landmark that did not match the physical reality. And at the bottom of the survey addendum, the same surveyor's signature. Harold Vance. Eleanor looked up. Did anyone ever measure Vance's stated distances against the actual landmarks? She asked. I tried, Margaret said. I went out there with a length of rope and my nephew Thomas, who was 16 at the time, and good with numbers. We measured from the stake to the creek bend that was my anchor point, similar to what you described. She looked at Eleanor calmly. Vance said 42 feet. We measured 31 feet. 11 feet, Eleanor said. 11 feet, yes. Clara Simmons, who had been sitting very quietly, said, That's the same discrepancy. Not quite the same number, Eleanor said, but the same structure. A fixed natural landmark, a stated distance, and a measurement that doesn't match reality. She was very still. He has a system. Vance has a system. He always uses a landmark, a creek fork, a creek bend, something immovable, and he always understates the distance, always in the same direction, always resulting in the same effect. She looked at Margaret. The land shifts toward Caldwell every time. Margaret Aldine looked at her with the patient eyes of a woman who has known this for years and has been waiting for someone else to say it out loud. Yes, she said simply. That's exactly what it does. Eleanor wrote to Alderton that same afternoon. The longest letter she had written yet, 8 pages in her neat, precise handwriting, organized by property and date and measurement discrepancy, with Margaret Aldine's documents attached as referenced exhibits. She named Harold Vance explicitly. She named the pattern explicitly. She used the word conspiracy once deliberately near the end of the letter, where Alderton would read it after the evidence had already built its case. She did not use the word fraud. She left that for Alderton to say first, because a lawyer saying fraud carries more weight than a woman saying it, and she was practical enough to use that reality instead of fighting it. She sealed the letter and walked it to Clara's post office personally. Clara held it for a moment before putting it in the outgoing basket. This is it, isn't it? Clara said. This is the thing. It's the beginning of the thing, Eleanor said. Alderton still has to decide if the evidence is sufficient. The circuit judge still has to hear the case. There are 100 ways this could still go wrong. But this is the turning point. Eleanor looked at her. Yes, she said. I think it is. William was waiting on the porch when she got back to the ranch. He had the look of a man who had spent the afternoon trying to work and not managing it, the tense, contained energy of someone monitoring for news while pretending to be occupied with something else. She told him what she'd found. Margaret Aldine's documents, the creek bend measurement, the 11-foot discrepancy, Harold Vance's signature on both surveys. He listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He's been doing this for 10 years, William said. At least 10 years, possibly longer. Alderton will look further back. Frank Dooley, he said. Henry Croft. He said the name the way a man says the names of people he's known for years and is only now understanding what happened to them. I watched Henry sell that farm. 2 years after he lost the river access. I thought it was the drought. It was Caldwell, Eleanor said. The drought was the final push. Caldwell took away the margin that would have let him survive it. Something moved through William's face. Not anger exactly, but the thing that lives adjacent to anger in a man who keeps himself very controlled. Something with edges to it. And Dooley's still farming his reduced acreage, he said. Yes. Working half the land his father worked because Harold Vance wrote down a number that wasn't true, Eleanor said. And Caldwell filed it, and no one had the time or the knowledge or the resources to prove it. He stood up from the porch step. I'm going to talk to Frank Dooley, he said. That might be premature. He deserves to know what I know. His voice was quiet and absolute. Whatever the legal outcome, Frank Dooley deserves to know that what happened to him was not his fault, and it was not bad luck. He looked at her. Wouldn't you want to know? She thought about standing on that train platform with her one suitcase, and Richard Caldwell's voice carrying across the crowd. Wouldn't you want to know that you were set up? That the thing that destroyed you was deliberate, not random, that it wasn't something about you that made you fail? Yes, she said. I would. Then I'm going to see Frank. He went. He came back 2 hours later, and he did not speak immediately when he came in. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands around the coffee cup Eleanor had ready, and he was quiet for a long time. He cried, William said finally. He said it without embarrassment, without making it dramatic. Just a fact. Frank Dooley sat at his own kitchen table and cried. He's 60 years old and he's been farming that reduced property for 12 years, and he told me he always believed he'd failed somehow, that he'd missed something, that if he'd been smarter or faster or better, he'd have kept his land. He looked at the coffee. He thought it was his fault. Eleanor sat down across from him. What did you tell him? She asked. The truth, William said. Same as you told me. He looked up. He wants to know if he can help. He can, she said. If his survey documents still exist. His wife kept them, same as Margaret Aldine. A pause. His wife told Frank she kept them because she always knew something was wrong, even when Frank told her to let it go. He was quiet for a moment. Women kept the evidence. Every house Margaret Frank's wife Clara the women kept the papers. Eleanor looked at him across the table. Because women, she said carefully, are accustomed to being in situations where no one believes them, and where the only thing they can control is what they can document. He held her gaze for the long time. I'm sorry, he said, for what this world makes necessary. It was a simple sentence, and it came from somewhere genuine, and Eleanor felt something in her chest shift at the unexpectedness of it. A man who could have said nothing, who was not required to say anything, choosing to say that. Thank you, she said. She meant it completely. Alderton arrived in Red Hollow 9 days before the circuit judge. Eleanor had not expected him to come in person. His letter the previous week had said he would send documents and instructions. But the man himself stepped off the Cheyenne train on a Wednesday morning with a leather case that was notably larger than the one he'd carried in his office. And when Eleanor met him at the station, she had come alone, because she'd had a feeling. He took one look at her expression and said, "The federal inquiry is moving faster than I expected." She went very still. "What federal inquiry?" she said. "The one I filed 3 weeks ago with the Territorial Land Commissioner," he said. He said it with the brisk matter-of-factness of a man who had been moving quickly and had perhaps not communicated at the speed at which things were developing. "Based on your letter, the pattern across 5 properties, Harold Vance and his surveying practice, I filed a formal complaint requesting a federal inquiry into a coordinated scheme to defraud territorial land patent holders." He set down his case. "The land commissioner responded 6 days ago. They've opened a preliminary investigation." Eleanor stared at him. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't want to raise expectations until I knew the inquiry was real and moving," he said. He had the grace to look slightly apologetic. "I should have written sooner. Things accelerated." "What does this mean for the circuit court hearing?" "It means the hearing still proceeds as scheduled. The circuit judge will rule on Carter's specific land patent challenge that has to happen regardless. But the federal investigation means that Caldwell's legal team is now aware that the scope of this matter extends beyond a single boundary dispute." He looked at her directly. "They contacted me yesterday." "Caldwell's lawyers?" "Yes. They wish to discuss a resolution." The September air was warm, and the train station was quiet around them, and Eleanor heard those words and understood exactly what they meant and what they didn't mean and what the danger in them was. "They want to settle," she said. "They want to make this go away as quietly and quickly as possible," Alderton said, "before the federal investigation gains momentum, before other property owners come forward, before the name Harold Vance appears in a territorial court record that becomes public." "What are they offering?" "I don't know yet. The conversation is preliminary." He picked up his case. But I want Carter in the room when it happens, and I want you there." "I'm his housekeeper," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. They had felt strange for a while now, but she had not examined that too closely. "You're the person who found the evidence that turned a boundary dispute into a federal matter," Alderton said. "I want you in the room." She told William that evening. He listened with the complete focused attention he brought to everything important, not interrupting, not reacting visibly, just receiving information and processing it in the particular way. He had the way that meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead before he responded. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "A settlement," he said. "Possibly. We don't know what they're offering." "What do you think they'll offer?" She thought about it honestly. "They'll withdraw the patent challenge, acknowledge the south boundary as correctly surveyed." She paused. "And they'll want something in return." "Silence," William said. "Silence about Vance, about the other properties, about the federal inquiry, or rather cooperation in limiting its scope." She looked at him. "They'll want this to end here, with you, without pulling the other families in." William's jaw tightened. "No. I know. Frank Dooley lost 12 acres that were his father's. Henry Croft lost his irrigation and his farm. Margaret Aldine fought for 8 months alone." His voice was very flat and very controlled. "I'm not walking away from a settlement that leaves them holding nothing while Caldwell signs a piece of paper and goes back to his dry goods store." "I know," she said again. "I told Alderton that was the position, before I came home." He looked at her. "I know you," she said simply. "I didn't need to ask." Something in his face moved. That deep, unguarded shift that she had seen occasionally, the one that didn't come from thought, but from somewhere below thought. "What does Alderton say?" he said. "He says it's the correct position morally and a harder position legally." She met his gaze. "He says the federal investigation is the leverage. If we decline a settlement that only covers your property, Caldwell's lawyers have to weigh the cost of continuing to fight your case in circuit court while a federal inquiry is running simultaneously. The legal fees alone. Make the land not worth it," William said. "Make the land not worth it," she confirmed. He stood up and walked to the kitchen window. She watched him stand there, a tall man in a small kitchen, looking out at the property he'd built over 8 years with his own hands, and the memory of a woman he'd loved and lost a property that was. She understood now not just land, but the last physical thing he had from a life that grief had reduced to its essentials. "Caldwell came to that train platform," William said without turning around. "Not the station. He knew when the train arrived. He was dressed for it. He'd done the calculation before she ever stepped off the car." He paused. "That wasn't disappointment about the money. That was a performance. He wanted witnesses. He wanted her to be seen being rejected publicly so that she'd have no standing in this town. No credibility." He turned. He knew she'd have to leave or take whatever was offered to her. He calculated on that. Eleanor was very still. "He didn't know who she was," William said. She looked at him across the kitchen. "No," she said. "He didn't." The meeting with Caldwell's lawyers happened on a Friday morning in Harlan Cross's office, which was the largest private meeting room in Red Hollow that wasn't a saloon. Caldwell himself was not present. His lawyers were 2 men from Cheyenne, polished, professional, expensive, with the careful composure of men who had been in many rooms like this one and knew how to manage them. Alderton sat across from them, with William on his right and Eleanor on his left, which had required no discussion and no arrangement. They had simply arrived that way. The offer was what Eleanor had expected. The patent challenge withdrawn. The boundary confirmed. The injunction lifted. In exchange, Carter's agreement not to pursue civil damages. His cooperation in limiting his testimony in the federal inquiry to his own property only. Harlan Cross, who was present as local counsel, and who had been listening with the careful attention of a man watching something historically significant occur in his office, cleared his throat once. Alderton said, "We appreciate the offer. We need 48 hours to consider it." The Cheyenne lawyers exchanged a glance. "Mr. Alderton," the senior one said, "the offer is time-sensitive. We'd prefer a response today." "I'm sure you would," Alderton said pleasantly. 48 hours. They left. The room was quiet. "That offer," William said, "doesn't include the other families." No, Alderton said. "Then we don't take it." Alderton opened his case. "I agree. And here's why that's the right legal strategy as well as the right moral one." He pulled out a document. "The federal inquiry has subpoenaed Harold Vance's surveying records, all of them, not just the 5 properties we identified, all of them, going back 20 years. He set the document on the table. "Vance's attorney contacted the inquiry office this morning. He is considering cooperating." The room was very, very quiet. "Vance," Harlan Cross said slowly, "is going to testify against Caldwell." "His attorney is strongly suggesting he will," Alderton said, "because the alternative for Vance is to face federal fraud charges himself. And a man who falsified surveys for another man's financial benefit, under instructions from that man, is considerably more likely to receive leniency if he comes forward than if he is compelled." Eleanor heard it all and felt a cold clarity settle through her. "Caldwell told him what numbers to write," she said. "That appears to be what the inquiry is finding, yes." "Then Caldwell doesn't just have a land dispute problem," she said. "No," Alderton said. "He has a federal criminal problem." William was looking at the table. When he looked up, his face held the expression of a man who has been fighting a war of attrition and has just been told for the first time that the ground is shifting in his favor. "The other families," he said. "Does this help them?" "If Vance cooperates fully and the federal inquiry proceeds, every fraudulent survey he conducted under Caldwell's direction becomes subject to challenge," Alderton said. "That means the Dooley land, the Croft access strip, Margaret Aldine's property, all of it." "They could get their land back," Eleanor said. "Some of them. The land that hasn't been sold to third parties, and there's not much of that. What they'll more certainly get is compensation. Federal fraud carries penalties that are paid to the damaged parties." He closed his case. "I'm not promising outcomes, but the trajectory has changed significantly." William looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Decline the settlement," William said to Alderton. "Tell them no." Word moved through Red Hollow, the way it always moved, fast and then faster, and then transformed by the speed of its own travel into something slightly different from what it started as. But in this case, close enough to the truth that the truth remained recognizable in it. People knew the federal inquiry was running. People knew Harold Vance had been subpoenaed. People knew that William Carter had declined a settlement offer from Caldwell's Cheyenne lawyers, and that declining a settlement from expensive lawyers meant one of two things. Either you were a fool, or you were holding something strong enough that settlement felt like a concession. Red Hollow had been watching Eleanor Hayes for 3 months. They had seen her arrive with one suitcase and be left on a platform. They had watched her walk into town with a straight back and manage her shopping without asking for help. They had heard about the document work, the Cheyenne trip, the witness measurements. They had heard because Clara Simmons was not a woman who kept everything to herself about the letters to the other families, and what Eleanor had found in Margaret Aldine's blue box. The town was revising its understanding of what had happened in its own streets for the past 10 years. Martha Hale came to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor answered the door. Martha Hale stood on the porch with a covered dish in her hands and an expression that a woman of her particular character could only maintain by significant personal effort, the expression of someone performing an action that her pride has strongly recommended against and her conscience has overruled. "I brought supper," she said. Eleanor looked at the dish. She looked at Martha Hale. "Thank you," she said. "Come in." Martha came in. She set the dish on the kitchen table. She looked around the kitchen, the clean surfaces, the garden herbs drying on the window ledge, the organized, inhabited quality of a room that has been tended, and something moved through her expression. "I owe you an apology," Martha said. She said it the way a woman says something she has rehearsed because the unrehearsed version would be harder to get through. "For what I said on the boardwalk, about propriety, about your situation here." She stood very straight. "I was wrong about what kind of woman you are. And I was wrong about a great many things regarding this town that I am only now understanding clearly." Eleanor looked at her for a moment, "Sit down, Mrs. Hale," she said. "I'll make coffee." Martha sat. "You knew about the land disputes," Eleanor said at the stove. "Didn't you?" A pause. "My husband has had business dealings with Caldwell for years. I knew there were families who'd had boundary troubles. I didn't ask the questions I should have." Her voice was lower now, the rehearsed quality gone. "I assumed that if men like my husband found Caldwell acceptable, then the trouble those families had was their own problem, their own failure." She stopped. "I was wrong to assume that." Eleanor brought the coffee and sat down. "Mrs. Hale," she said. "Henry Croft. Do you know where he went after he sold the farm? His sister's place, in Colorado." Martha looked at her. "Why?" "Because if the federal inquiry results in compensation, someone needs to find him. Someone who knows this county and knows these families." She held the older woman's gaze. "Someone the town listens to." Martha Hale was quiet. "You're asking me to help," she said. "I'm telling you there's work to be done," Eleanor said. "I'm telling you that the people who know this county and its families are the ones best positioned to make sure the outcome of this inquiry reaches everyone it should reach." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "What you do with that information is up to you." Martha looked at her for a long time. "You are not what I expected," she said. "No," Eleanor said. "I've been told that." The circuit judge arrived on a Monday. Judge Samuel Parrish was 70 years old and had been riding this circuit for 22 of them, and had the unhurried authority of a man who has heard every variety of human dispute and developed a very accurate instinct for which ones are about what they claim to be about. He set up court in the town meeting hall, which was the largest room in Red Hollow, and on the first morning it was standing room, and then every farmer and shopkeeper and ranch hand who could get to town was there, because by now everyone understood that this hearing was not just about William Carter's south boundary. Caldwell's lawyers had filed 6 motions before the hearing opened. Alderton had answered all 6. Judge Parrish read through them with the morning light coming through the high windows and the room very quiet around him, and then he set the papers down and said, "I've reviewed the federal inquiry materials. I'm going to allow them as contextual evidence. Counsel for the respondent may object for the record." The senior Cheyenne lawyer stood and objected for the record. "Objection noted," Parrish said. "Proceed." Eleanor sat in the third row with her document satchel on her lap and her hands folded on top of it, and she watched the hearing unfold with the particular attention of someone who has been building toward this moment for months and knows that the building is now someone else's job. Alderton was good. She had known he was good from the Cheyenne meeting, but watching him work in a courtroom clarified it. He was precise and unhurried, and he laid the evidence in the order. She would have chosen the original survey first, then the witness measurements, then the Vance pattern across all 5 properties, then the subpoena and its implications. He did not over-argue. He did not repeat himself. He trusted the evidence. The Creek Fork stake was the anchor exactly as she had known it would be. Caldwell's lawyers challenged the witnesses. Tom Barrett answered their questions with the unshakable plainness of a man who shod horses for a living and had no patience for elaborate misdirection. Doc Whitmore answered with the precise, unhurried calm of a physician reading a measurement. Jake Barrett, called as corroborating witness, answered with the honest directness of a young man who had been asked to tell the truth and saw no reason not to. When Harold Vance took the stand, brought from Cheyenne, under the federal subpoena, with his attorney at the back of the room, the entire hall went very still. He was a small gray man, with the diminished look of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has recently set it down, and is not sure yet whether he feels relieved or simply exposed. He looked at no one in particular when he stated his name. He answered Alderton's questions in a flat, quiet voice. Yes, he had conducted surveys for Caldwell in this county over a period of years. Yes, he had been instructed by Caldwell on specific properties to record distances to landmark features that did not match his actual measurements. Yes, he understood that those false measurements resulted in land being effectively transferred to Caldwell or to Caldwell's preferred claimants. Yes, he had done it anyway. He said the last answer in the voice of a man who has stopped justifying something and is simply acknowledging it. and the room around him was so quiet that Eleanor could hear the woman beside her breathing. Richard Caldwell, seated at the respondent's table with his Cheyenne lawyers on either side, looked at the floor. Judge Parrish looked at Caldwell for a long moment. Then he said, "I think we'll take a brief recess." During the recess, Eleanor stepped outside. She stood in the September air cooler, now the first edge of autumn, beginning to come into the summer warmth, and she breathed. William appeared beside her. He had been in the front row for the entire hearing, and she had not looked at him directly once, because she had needed all her focus for what was happening at the front of the room. But she had been aware of him the entire time, the way she was always aware of him. Now a constant settled presence at the edge of her attention. "Vance," William said. "Yes." "I didn't think he'd actually say it." "He had no better option," she said. "But it took something to say it anyway." She looked at him. "How are you holding up?" He looked at the sky for a moment. "I've been better. I've been worse." A pause. "You, the same." She felt the weight of the past 3 months in her bones, the calculating, and the letter writing, and the conversations, and the worry that had accompanied all of it. The particular exhaustion of fighting a battle with your mind instead of your hands. "Whatever Parrish rules." "It's going to be all right," William said, quietly, with a certainty that she recognized as something other than optimism. She looked at him. "You don't know that," she said. "No," he said. "But I know what we built. Whatever that judge says or doesn't say, we built it. Together." He held her gaze. "That's real, whatever comes next." The door to the meeting hall opened and Harlan Cross leaned out. "They're reconvening," he said. Eleanor and William looked at each other for one more moment. Then they went back inside. Judge Parrish settled himself at the front of the room and looked out over Red Hollow, all its farmers and shopkeepers and ranchers, all the people who had been living alongside something wrong for 10 years without the tools to name it. And he said with the plain directness of a man who has made up his mind and sees no reason to soften it, "In the matter of the Carter land patent, I find in favor of the respondent. The original 1879 county survey is confirmed as valid. The south boundary stands as recorded. The injunction is dissolved." He paused. "Furthermore, I am referring the full record of this hearing to the Federal Land Commissioner, with a recommendation for expanded inquiry into all surveys conducted by Harold Vance in this county, dating back to 1879. The room erupted. Not the orderly reaction of a legal proceeding. The uncontrolled immediate sound of people who have been holding something in for a long time and have just been given permission to let it go. Voices rising all at once, chairs scraping someone near the back, saying Frank Dooley's name loudly, and Frank Dooley's voice answering from somewhere in the crowd, with a roughness in it that was not anger. Eleanor sat in the third row and did not move. She felt William's hand come down over hers on the arm of the chair. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance for the room. Just a man's hand covering a woman's hand in the specific way of someone who has something to say and cannot say it here in this noise with all these people and is saying it the only way currently available. She turned her hand over and held his. At the respondent's table, Richard Caldwell's senior lawyer was speaking to him in a low, urgent voice, and Caldwell was not looking at the lawyer. He was staring at the front of the room with the expression of a man watching the architecture of his life develop cracks in places he had believed were solid. He had built his position in Red Hollow on the assumption that certain people did not matter. That a woman with one suitcase was disposable. That working families without lawyers were helpless. That the distance between a courthouse in Cheyenne and a ranch 3 miles east of a small Wyoming town was too far for truth to travel. He had been wrong about all of it. And the woman he'd left standing on the platform, the one he'd calculated would disappear, was sitting in the third row of his reckoning, with her hand in William Carter's, and her head up, and she was not looking at him at all. She was looking at the judge. She had won. The noise in the meeting hall took a long time to settle. Judge Parrish let it run for a minute. The release of a room full of people who had needed this for longer than some of them knew, and then he brought his gavel down twice, and the sound cut through, and people found their manners again, and the hall went to a quieter kind of charged. Eleanor released William's hand, not because she wanted to. Because there were things that needed doing, and she was first and always a practical woman. She opened her document satchel and took out the clean copy of the judgment summary she had prepared the night before, the one Alderton had told her to have ready, because Judge Parrish liked things organized and clean copies saved time, and she passed it forward to Harlan Cross without being asked. Harlan looked at it. He looked at her. He passed it to Alderton. Alderton, who was gathering his papers at the front of the room, with the efficient calm of a man closing a successful case, took it without breaking stride and presented it to the court recorder. The recorder accepted it with the mechanical gratitude of someone whose job had just been made easier. William was watching her do all of this. "You had that ready last night," he said. "I had it ready 3 days ago," she said. "I just updated the date." He shook his head slowly, not in exasperation, in something that was closer to wonder. Around them, the room was breaking into conversations, the rapid overlapping exchanges of people processing a verdict together. Some of them emotional, some of them practical, some of them already doing the arithmetic of what this meant for their own situations. Frank Dooley was near the back of the room, and Eleanor could see his wife beside him, with her hand on his arm, and Frank was not saying anything. He was just standing very still, with the look of a man receiving news his body needs time to believe. Ed Marsh found William before they'd made it 3 steps toward the door. "Carter," he said, and stopped there, as if the name was enough, because what followed it was in his face, and in the firm, brief grip of his hand on William's shoulder, the way men communicate the things they don't have words to put into sentences. "Thank you," William said. "The steaks." "Forget the steaks," Ed said. "Buy me a coffee sometime." He moved off into the crowd. Tom Barrett was next with Jake beside him, and Jake was trying to look composed and not quite managing it. His young face bright with the barely contained excitement of someone who has just been part of something historic and is only now fully understanding it. "The measurement held," Jake said to Eleanor with the specific pride of someone who wants acknowledgement for a specific contribution. "The measurement held," she confirmed. "You were precise, Jake. It mattered." Jake Barrett stood approximately 1 inch taller than he had 30 seconds before. Tom Barrett looked at Eleanor with the direct, simple gaze of a man who says what he means and means what he says. "This town owes you something," he said. "I hope it pays its debts better than it kept its eyes open." "It kept its eyes open today," she said. "That's enough." The crowd thinned slowly. Harlan Cross had a conversation with Alderton near the front that involved several documents and a handshake. Sheriff Harding made his way through the room with the careful progress of a man who is aware of his own position in recent events and is navigating toward the outcome with the dignity of someone who came through on the right side without having arrived there as quickly as he should have. He stopped beside William. "Carter," he said. "George." A pause. "I should have moved faster on the fire report." "Yes," William said, without anger, without ceremony. Harding nodded. He accepted it the way an honest man accepts an honest assessment. "I'll be filing my own report to the federal inquiry. Everything I have on the fire and the stakes." He paused again. "For what it's worth." "It's worth something," William said. Harding moved on. Caldwell was gone. Eleanor had noticed it during the recess, his lawyers closing their cases with the brisk efficiency of men whose time cost money and who had no reason to stay, and Caldwell himself had left with them, not looking at anyone, not speaking. The dry goods store across the street from the meeting hall had its shutters drawn by the time the hearing concluded. Eleanor thought about that for a moment, and then let it go. Whatever came next for Richard Caldwell was in the hands of the federal inquiry and whatever honesty Harold Vance decided to maintain. That was not her work anymore. Her work was done. The understanding of it arrived quietly, the way endings arrive when you've been moving so fast toward them that you don't notice the moment of arrival until you're already past it. She stood in the clearing room with her satchel in her hands and felt the particular slightly disorienting stillness of a person who has been running and has just stopped. William appeared beside her. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They walked out of the meeting hall into the September afternoon cooler than it had been, the quality of the light beginning to shift toward autumn, and neither of them spoke on the walk to the wagon. But the silence had a different texture than the silences of 3 months ago. Those had been the silences of two strangers being careful around each other. This one was the silence of two people who had run a long road together and were still standing at the end of it. That was not a small thing. The ride back to the ranch was quiet for the first mile. Then William said without preamble, "What happens now?" It wasn't quite a question. It was the sentence of a man who has something specific on his mind and is working toward it by indirect approach. "The federal inquiry continues," Eleanor said. "Alderton will write. There will be depositions and correspondence, and probably another trip to Cheyenne before it's fully resolved. The other families will be contacted. Margaret Aldine's documents will be formally submitted." She paused. "It'll take months probably, but the hard part is done." "That's not what I meant," he said. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "I meant what happens now," he said, with the arrangement." He was choosing words with the particular care of a man who is not accustomed to choosing words for this kind of conversation. "The housekeeper arrangement." The wagon rolled forward. The road curved toward the east, and the ranch came into view at the end of the long drive, the house, the barn, the outbuildings, the garden that had been growing all summer in Eleanor's hands. She thought about how to answer honestly. "What do you want to happen?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The horse moved at its steady pace. "I want you to stay," he said. Simple, direct. The way he said everything that mattered. "Not as a housekeeper." He paused. "I don't know how to. I haven't done this in a long time. Said this to someone." Another pause. "I'm saying it badly." "You're saying it clearly," she said. "Then you understand what I'm—" "Yes," she said. "I understand." And she looked at the ranch coming closer through the afternoon light. At the garden where the beans she'd planted in June were fully grown and had been harvested twice. At the front porch where the sag had been fixed, she'd found the repair done one morning without being told about it. William's way of communicating through action what he found difficult to say in words. At the place that had been a structure when she arrived, and had become in 3 months of cooking and cleaning and planting and fighting and sitting at kitchen tables in the early dark with coffee and surveys, something different. Something she thought of without intending to, and then without trying to stop it as home. "I want to stay," she said. William was very still for a moment. Then he exhaled a quiet single breath, and she understood that he had been more uncertain than he'd appeared, and that the uncertainty had been real, and that the relief was real, and that all of it, the uncertainty and the relief, mattered to her in a way that nothing had mattered in a very long time. He reached over and took her hand on the wagon seat. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. Just took it the way a man reaches for something he has decided belongs in his hand, and held it for the rest of the drive. Neither of them said anything else until they reached home. The evening settled in around the ranch with the particular gentleness of early September, the heat releasing from the day, the first coolness coming in from the north, the light going golden, and then amber, and then the long blue dusk of high plains country. Eleanor made supper. Not because it was her job. The formal architecture of that arrangement had dissolved somewhere between the kitchen table in the early dark and a courtroom where a federal judge dissolved an injunction, but because cooking was one of the languages she used for the things she felt, but hadn't yet said directly, and there were things she was feeling tonight that needed saying somehow. William came in from the barn, washed his hands, and sat at the table. He watched her move around the kitchen with the watching he'd developed over 3 months. Not passive observation, but the active, attentive kind that meant he was present to her in a way that she had not been present to someone in longer than she could easily recall. "The apple cake," he said. She turned from the stove. "You made it," he said. He was looking at the pan on the counter. He had not been in the kitchen before supper, and she had made it this afternoon while he was out at the south fence that was now irrevocably legally, and finally his checking the posts. "It's a good day," she said. "Good days get apple cake." Something in his face opened up that expression she'd seen rarely, and treasured each time the one that meant the long guard was down, and he was simply there present, without the careful management he maintained most of the time. "Come sit down," he said. "I'll get the plates." She turned from the stove and looked at him. William Carter, who had not made a social gesture in this kitchen unprompted in the 3 months she'd known him, was already up and at the cabinet. She sat down. He put the plates on the table and cut the apple cake and poured the coffee and sat across from her, and they ate their good day supper in the kitchen of the ranch that was his, and was becoming hers, and the food was warm, and the coffee was strong, and the evening was quiet around them. "Clara Simmons," Eleanor said. "She'll want to know the outcome in detail. She's been part of this from the beginning, and she deserves the full account." "I'll ride in tomorrow," William said. "And Doc Whitmore. I'll go to the doc too. Margaret Aldine should hear from us in person, not through the town grapevine. She kept those documents for 4 years on her own. She deserves—" "Eleanor." She stopped. "We can plan tomorrow, he said. Not impatiently. Gently, the way he said gentle things directly without decoration. "Tonight is tonight." She looked at him across the table. She had been managing forward motion for so long. The next letter, the next document, meant the next conversation, the next problem to solve. That the simple act of stopping felt slightly foreign. She had forgotten what it felt like to let a moment be what it was without immediately turning it toward the next thing. "All right," she said. "Tell me something," he said. "That has nothing to do with surveys or federal inquiries or circuit judges." She thought about it. "My mother," she said, "had a garden in Ohio. Smaller than the one here. She didn't have the space. But she grew tomatoes every summer, and she said the only thing worth knowing about tomatoes was that they never did what you expected, and that was the interesting part." She looked at the window at the dark outside it. "I haven't thought about that in years, but I thought about it when I was planting in June." He listened the way he listened completely. "What was she like?" he said. "Practical," Eleanor said. "Funny in a quiet way. She didn't laugh loudly, but she laughed often. She was the kind of person who made a room feel more settled just by being in it." She paused. "I think I've been trying to be that person ever since she died." "You are," William said. She looked at him. "You are that person," he said. He said it simply with the same directness he brought to everything. "You've been that person in this house since the second week you were here. I noticed it, and I didn't say anything because I didn't have the words for it at the time." He met her eyes. "I have them now." Eleanor was very quiet. "Catherine," she said carefully. "Was she?" "She was different," he said. "Not a comparison, not a ranking, just an honest acknowledgement that two people who mattered to him were two different people. She laughed loudly. She filled a room with noise. She was gone and the silence was unbearable." He looked at the table. "I thought the silence was the permanent condition. I got used to it because I didn't think there was an alternative." "And now?" she said. He looked up. "Now the silence is different," he said. "It's not empty, He searched for it. "It's the silence between things, not the silence instead of things." She understood that. She understood it completely and immediately, the way you understand something that has been true in your own experience, and that you haven't had language for until someone else provides it. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." 3 days later. Alderton's letter arrived. Eleanor read it at the kitchen table with William standing behind her, and this time the news was not complicated and not frightening and did not require an emergency response. Harold Vance had signed a full cooperation agreement with the federal inquiry. His complete surveying records, 23 years of them, had been submitted. The preliminary review had identified 14 properties in the county that appeared to contain fraudulent measurements, all conducted at Caldwell's direction, all resulting in land transfers or access restrictions that benefited Caldwell. 14 properties, not 5. 14 families. The federal inquiry had formally recommended criminal charges against Richard Caldwell for conspiracy to commit land fraud under the Territorial Land Act. Caldwell's Cheyenne lawyers had already filed a response, but the inquiry commissioner's office had noted, and Alderton underlined this in his letter, that the evidence was sufficiently documented and corroborated that the likelihood of charges proceeding was in the inquiry office's formal assessment high. The letter ended with the personal note from Alderton less formal than the legal summary that preceded it. Miss Hayes, it read, I have been practicing law in Wyoming Territory for 19 years. The Creek Fork measurement you identified from Margaret Aldine's documents was the piece that connected the pattern. Without it, we had a boundary dispute. With it, we had a conspiracy. I want you to know that when the charges are formally filed, and I believe they will be, your name will be in the record as the person who found the thread. Whatever you do next in this life, you did this. William read it over her shoulder. He was quiet for a moment. 14 families, he said. 14 families, she confirmed. Another silence. That's why he came to the platform, William said. When you arrived, he was there because he'd already done his research on you. He already knew there was no money. He wanted to make sure you left town. He paused. Because if you'd gotten settled and started asking questions about this county, he'd have known you were dangerous. Eleanor had thought about this. She had thought about it in the middle of the night when the full shape of it had become clear to her. A man who had been running a systematic land fraud for 23 years, meticulous about knowing the resources and capabilities of anyone who might threaten his operation. Richard Caldwell had done his homework on Eleanor Hayes before she ever stepped off that train. He had known she could read survey documents. He had known her father was a land agent. He had calculated that a woman with that background, settled in Red Hollow, and employed and stable, was a risk he didn't want to take. So he had tried to remove her. Publicly. Humiliatingly. In front of an audience that would ensure she left with no standing and no welcome. I was afraid of me, she said. She said it not with satisfaction, but with the plain recognition of a fact that still even now took something from her to fully absorb. Before I knew anything, before I'd done anything, he was afraid of what I might be capable of. He was right to be, William said. She set the letter down. She thought about the platform, and the suitcase, and the crowd watching, and the specific humiliation of a man's contempt made public. She thought about the station manager telling her she couldn't stay. She thought about standing there with nowhere to go, and a town full of strangers, and the particular cold despair of a person who has used up every option. She thought about a tall man stepping off a boardwalk. William, she said. Yeah, that day at the station. She turned to look at him. You didn't know any of this. You didn't know about the surveys or the fraud or what I was capable of. You just saw. I saw a woman being treated wrong, he said. That was enough. She held his gaze. It was enough, she said quietly. It changed everything. He looked at her with those steady, direct blue eyes, the eyes that had looked at her from the beginning without calculation, without agenda, without the particular measuring gaze of a man assessing what she was worth to him, and he said, You changed everything. Not the situation. You. The formal proposal, when it came, was on a Saturday evening in early October. The garden was done for the year. Harvested, turned, the beds mounded for winter in the way Eleanor had learned from her mother and had carried with her across the years and the miles and all the losses between Ohio and Wyoming. The apple tree at the east edge of the property had been dropping fruit for 2 weeks, and the kitchen smelled permanently of warm sugar and cinnamon from the preserves she'd been putting up, and the house had the particular feeling of a place that has been cared for through a full season and is settling into itself for winter. William came in from the south fence that was legal and documented and real, and washed his hands and stood in the kitchen doorway with the particular stillness that she had learned to read. The way she read everything else about him, and she knew before he spoke that this was a different kind of moment. Eleanor, he said. She dried her hands on her apron and turned. He crossed the kitchen. He was not a man who rehearsed things, and this was not rehearsed. It had the slight roughness of genuine feeling, finding its shape in real time, which was better than rehearsed, which was the most honest thing she knew how to say about it. He reached into his vest pocket and held out a ring. It was not an expensive ring. It was a simple band, silver plain, the kind of ring a working man buys when he wants something honest rather than something impressive. She recognized it as exactly the kind of thing he would choose. I was married once, he said. I loved Catherine. That was real, and it mattered, and I won't tell you otherwise." He held her gaze. "And I have spent 6 years believing that was the end of that chapter of my life, that I was a man who had had his one good thing and lost it, and the work after that was just managing." He paused. "Then you came here with one suitcase and nothing left, and in 3 months you gave this place something it hadn't had in a decade." He looked at the ring. "I'm not good at words, you know that." "You're better than you think," she said. "Eleanor Hayes." He said her name with the full weight of everything they had been through and everything they were. "Will you stay here, not as a housekeeper, not as an arrangement, as my wife?" He met her eyes. "Because this is your home if you want it to be, and I want you to want it to be." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the road that had brought her here, the grief and the loss and the train ticket bought with the last of her mother's jewelry, and the platform and the crowd, and the humiliation that had been designed to destroy her. She thought about the garden and the surveys and the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with the coffee and the lamp, and the particular quality of working alongside someone who trusted you completely. She thought about beans planted in ground, someone said, would never grow them. Coming up anyway. She thought about her mother saying tomatoes never did what you expected, and that was the interesting part. "Yes," she said. She took the ring. He put it on her finger with the careful, deliberate hands of a man for whom this action carries the full weight of its meaning. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he put his arms around her, not dramatically, not with the grand gesture of a man in a story, but with the simple, complete certainty of a man who has made a decision and means it with everything he has. And she leaned into him and felt the solid warmth of someone who was going to be there tomorrow and the day after and all the days of the season turning around them. The wedding was in November, small and plain and exactly right. Doc Whitmore stood up with them. Clara Simmons sat in the front row and cried without any apparent embarrassment. Martha Hale attended and brought a covered dish and shook Eleanor's hand with the firm grip of a woman who has revised her opinions and intends the revision to be thorough. Frank Dooley came with his wife who had kept the documents, and they sat together in the second row, and Frank's wife held his hand through the whole thing. Jake Barrett stood at the back of the room and tried very hard to look like a man rather than a 16-year-old who was moved by the occasion and did not entirely succeed, and Tom Barrett stood beside him and pretended not to notice. Ed Marsh arrived late and stood near the door for the duration and left immediately after. But he had come, and Eleanor understood that for Ed Marsh, who said almost nothing and meant all of it, this was an act of significant emotional expression. Margaret Aldine sat beside Clara Simmons and told her at a volume slightly too loud for the setting that she had known from the first month that this was going to happen, and Clara said she had known from the first week, and they had a brief, contented argument about it that the minister talked over without apparent difficulty. The ceremony was short. William said his vows in the same voice. He said everything that mattered, quiet, direct, without excess. Eleanor said hers the same way, because she had learned from him that some things are said most completely by saying exactly what you mean and nothing more. And at the end of it, in the November light of a small Wyoming town that had taken a long time to understand what kind of woman it had received, and had come around to understanding it. In the end, William Carter kissed his wife for the first time, and someone in the back of the room, Jake Barrett, almost certainly made a sound that was immediately suppressed. The federal charges against Richard Caldwell were filed in December. The Cheyenne newspaper ran the story on the front page. Caldwell's dry goods store in Red Hollow closed the following week, not from legal compulsion, but from the specific quiet devastation of a man whose community has understood publicly what he is. Some businesses survive scandal. Some do not, and the ones that do not are usually the ones where the scandal was not a deviation from character, but a revelation of it. Eleanor read the newspaper account at the kitchen table with her coffee, and William read it beside her, and when she finished, she set it down and said nothing for a moment. "Is it enough?" William asked. She thought about 14 families. She thought about Frank Dooley's father's land broken by hand. She thought about Henry Croft's failed crops after the irrigation was gone. She thought about Margaret Aldine fighting alone for 8 months with a box of carefully organized documents that she kept because she always knew the day would come. No, she said honestly. It's not enough to undo 23 years. It's not enough for Henry Croft, who had to sell and start over. It's not enough for the years Frank Dooley spent thinking it was his fault. She paused. But it's accountability. And accountability is where repair starts even when it can't finish the job. William was quiet. Alderton says the compensation from the federal charges could be significant, she said. For the families where the land was lost and not recoverable. It won't be the land back, but it'll be something real. Something real, he said. Yes. He put his hand over hers on the table. She turned her hand and held his the same motion as the courtroom, the same completeness in it. The south fence needs another section replaced before hard winter, he said. I know, I saw it yesterday. And the chicken coop roof has a loose board on the east side. I put a note on the workbench. He looked at her. You were out at the chicken coop yesterday, he said. I was checking on the hens. When? Before you were up. Eleanor. He said her name with the exasperated warmth of a man discovering that the woman he married operates on a schedule approximately 1 hour ahead of his own. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. I wanted to know about the roof. He shook his head. The expression on his face was the one she loved best, the one that was not quite a smile, because he was not a man who smiled easily, but that was the fullest possible version of the thing that lived in him where other people kept their smiles. Wife, he said. Husband, she said. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning. She had checked the sky that morning and known it was coming, the particular gray of a Wyoming sky that has made up its mind. The ranch was quiet around them. The animals settled the fences, standing the garden put to bed under the first cold of the year. In the spring, she was already planning what she would plant, not because she was certain of anything. Not because life had promised her continuity or stability or the absence of loss. She had learned the hard way, the only way anything important is learned, that those promises are not available for purchase at any price, but because some things are worth doing, regardless of whether you get to see what they become. Because the ground is there, and the seed is there, and the work is real, and the tending is real, and the living of a life is not located in its outcomes, but in the daily particular irreplaceable act of showing up for it. Her mother had known that. William knew that in the way of a man who had kept a ranch for 6 years alone. Not because he was certain it would matter, but because the work was honest and the land was real, and you do the next true thing in front of you, and then the one after that. Eleanor Hayes had known it too, somewhere beneath all the loss and the careful managing and the one battered suitcase. She had known it the way a person knows a thing they were born knowing and only remember when the conditions are right. She was home, not because she had arrived somewhere safe or somewhere easy or somewhere that would never ask anything hard of her again, but because she was here in this kitchen, in this November, in this life with this man, and she had chosen it with everything she had, and it had chosen her back. The snow came down outside the window, soft and certain, covering the ground where the garden would be again in spring. William poured more coffee. Eleanor picked up her cup, and in the house that had been a structure, and was now a home in the town that had failed a woman, and then found its better instincts in the wide, cold country of Wyoming, where two lonely people had found each other by accident and stayed by choice. The morning went on quiet and ordinary, and enough. More than enough. It was everything.